In this video, we're breaking down 2 hours of Stranger Things facts to help you fall asleep. Let's get started. First up we have Hawkins, Indiana, the cursed small town. Hawkins sits in Roane County in the state of Indiana, roughly 80 miles outside of Indianapolis. The town has somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 people living in it. For decades, Hawkins was the kind of place where nothing much happened. The last time anyone went missing before 1983 was way back in the summer of 1923. The last suicide happened in fall 1961. By all accounts, this was a quiet Midwestern town where people went about their normal lives without much drama or trouble. That changed completely in November 1983. A 12-year-old boy named Will Byers disappeared while riding his bike home from a friend's house on the night of November 6th. His mother, Joyce Byers, insisted he was still alive and tried to communicate with him through Christmas lights she hung all over her house. The town's police chief, Jim Hopper, led the search efforts. A few days later, what appeared to be Will's body was pulled from a local quarry. But that body turned out to be fake, created by people working at Hawkins National Laboratory to cover up what really happened. The laboratory was a government facility that had been conducting secret experiments for years. They had a program where they tested psychic abilities on children. One of these children, a girl called 11, accidentally opened a gateway to another dimension during an experiment at the lab. This gateway let a monster through into the regular world. The creature, which people later called a Demogorgon, grabbed Will Byers and took him into this other dimension. His friends called this place the Upside Down because it looked like a dark, decayed mirror version of Hawkins. The Demogorgon killed other people too. Barbara Holland, a teenage girl who went to a party at Steve Harrington's house, was taken by the creature while sitting by the swimming pool. Unlike Will, Barb did not survive. Her disappearance was covered up by agents from Hawkins' lab. They eventually claimed she died from exposure to toxic chemicals, but that was a lie to hide the truth about the gateway and the monster. After about a week in the Upside Down, Will was rescued by his mother and Chief Hopper. 11 destroyed the Demogorgon, but disappeared in the process. The opening of that first gateway started causing serious problems for Hawkins. Even after 11 closed it in 1984, the Upside Down had already begun spreading underneath the town. Massive tunnel systems grew out from the gate, burrowing deep into the ground beneath Hawkins. These tunnels caused crops and fields above them to rot and die. The decaying vegetation looked sick and wrong, like something was poisoning the earth from below. A scientist named Dr. Sam Owens took over the laboratory and tried to contain the problem by doing controlled burns of the infected areas. During this time, a creature from the Upside Down called the Mind Flayer possessed Will Byers. The Mind Flayer was a massive entity that acted like a hive mind, controlling all the creatures and matter from that dimension. It used Will to spy on what was happening in the regular world and tried to take over more people. Eventually, 11 returned to Hawkins and closed the main gate at the laboratory using her powers. This cut off the Mind Flayer's influence and stopped the immediate spread of the Upside Down. In 1985, new trouble came to Hawkins. A company called Starcourt Industries built a big shopping mall on the east side of town. The mayor, Larry Klein, helped them buy up land and get the permits they needed. But Starcourt Industries was actually a fake company controlled by the Soviet Union. The real purpose of building the mall was to hide a secret underground base where Russian scientists were trying to open their own gate to the Upside Down using experimental machines and technology. The Russians succeeded in opening a new gate beneath the mall. This brought the Mind Flayer back with a vengeance. The creature started possessing residents of Hawkins and turning them into what people called the Flayed. These possessed people would melt down into organic matter that the Mind Flayer used to build itself a huge physical body in the regular world. Billy Hargrove, Max Mayfield's stepbrother, was one of the people taken over by the Mind Flayer. He tried to bring other victims to the creature, including his stepsister and her friends. Everything came to a head on July 4, 1985 at Starcourt Mall. Chief Hopper, Joyce Byers, and a man named Murray Bauman broke into the Russian base underneath the mall to destroy their machine and close the gate. Meanwhile, the Mind Flayer, in its massive flesh monster form, attacked the kids at the mall. Billy Hargrove broke free from the Mind Flayer's control at the last moment and sacrificed himself to protect 11 and the others. The creature killed him for his betrayal. At the same time, Joyce destroyed the Russian machine, which closed the gate and caused the Mind Flayer's body to collapse into lifeless flesh. The battle and explosion at the mall started a massive fire that destroyed Starcourt. The official story reported in the news blamed a mall fire for the deaths. According to newspaper reports, 30 people died in the incident, though the real death toll from the Mind Flayers' attacks was actually higher. The government and Hawkins lab covered up what really happened by saying the fire was caused by faulty construction or an accident. Chief Hopper was believed to have died in the explosion, though he actually survived and ended up captured by Russians and sent to a prison camp in Kamchatka. After the mall fire, Hawkins became the subject of conspiracy theories. News about Mayor Klein's arrest for corruption and illegal deals related to the mall's construction spread across the country. People started asking questions about all the strange deaths and disasters that kept happening in this one small town. Some residents began to wonder if something was seriously wrong with Hawkins, even if they did not know the real truth about the Upside Down. The worst disaster came in March 1986. A new threat emerged from the Upside Down, though at first people did not understand what was happening. On March 21st, a teenage cheerleader named Chrissy Cunningham was killed in Eddie Munson's trailer in a horrifying way. Her limbs were snapped and twisted, and her eyes were crushed into her skull. She appeared to float in the air before dying. Eddie ran away in terror, and many people thought he had murdered her. The next day, another teenager named Fred Benson died the same way. Fred worked on the school newspaper with Nancy Wheeler. He was killed on a road not far from the trailer park while investigating Chrissy's death. 2 days after that, on March 25th, a basketball player named Patrick McKinney died the same way while swimming in Lover's Lake. His teammate Jason Carver watched Patrick get lifted out of the water and killed right in front of him. These murders were committed by a creature from the Upside Down that people nicknamed Vecna after a villain from the game Dungeons & Dragons. Vecna was actually Henry Creel, the son of a man named Victor Creel who had lived in Hawkins back in 1959. Henry had killed his own mother and sister when he was a child using psychic powers. Dr. Brenner brought him into the Hawkins lab program and made him the first test subject known as 1. In 1979, Eleven accidentally sent Henry into the Upside Down during a fight, where he became the twisted creature known as Vecna. Vecna was targeting teenagers who had experienced trauma, mental health problems, or guilt. Chrissy suffered from an eating disorder and was verbally abused by her mother. Fred felt guilty about a car accident he caused that killed someone. Patrick was being physically abused by his father. Max Mayfield became Vecna's next target because she was depressed and felt guilty about her stepbrother Billy's death. Vecna used these painful emotions and memories to psychologically torture his victims before killing them. The creature had a specific plan. Each time Vecna killed someone, a new gateway to the Upside Down opened at the location where they died. Vecna needed 4 deaths to open 4 gates that would connect in a specific pattern. On March 27th, Vecna attacked Max while she visited Billy's grave. Her friends played her favorite song, Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, through headphones, which temporarily brought her out of Vecna's trance and saved her. But later that night, Vecna attacked Max again at the abandoned Creel house. This time, he succeeded in killing her, though Eleven used her powers to bring Max back to life after about a minute. That 1 minute of death was enough for Vecna's plan to work. 4 massive cracks ripped across Hawkins, spreading out from 4 different locations where Vecna's victims had died. The cracks met in the center of town, creating what felt like a major earthquake. The event measured 7.4 on the Richter scale. Buildings collapsed, homes were destroyed, and fires started all over Hawkins. The official death toll from the earthquake was 22 people. Jason Carver was one of them, ripped in half when the ground split open beneath him at the Creel house. President Ronald Reagan declared Hawkins a federal disaster area. The United States military, the Federal Emergency Management Agency known as FEMA, and the Indiana National Guard were all sent to the region. Thousands of residents were displaced and lost their homes. Many people decided to leave Hawkins entirely, starting an exodus from the town. Those who stayed found their town completely changed. The 4 gates remained open despite efforts to seal them. Red lightning cracked across the sky. Strange spores fell like snow. Plants began to wither and die as the Upside Down started spreading into the regular world. By the time March ended, many residents of Hawkins openly believed the town was cursed. The basketball team and other people thought the deaths were caused by a satanic cult connected to Eddie Munson and his Dungeons & Dragons club, the Hellfire Club. They did not know the real cause was a monster from another dimension. Eddie Munson died a hero in the Upside Down, fighting creatures called Demobats to protect his friends. but most of Hawkins still believed he was a murderer. Posters with his face were torn down and defaced. Signs warning about satanic cults appeared around town. The atmosphere became tense and paranoid, as people looked for someone or something to blame for all the tragedy. The military took complete control of Hawkins. They covered the 4 main rifts with huge steel plates and built a massive base called the Military Access Control Zone, or MAC-Z, around the giant central portal in the middle of town. The entire town was fenced in and placed under strict quarantine. Nobody could leave, and people from outside could not come in. The town became an occupied zone, cut off from the rest of the world. The government's official explanation was that an earthquake had struck, and they were trying to find the source of continued tremors to prevent more damage. By November 1987, Hawkins had been under military quarantine for over 500 days. The town had become a heavily policed and controlled area. Soldiers patrolled the streets. Security cameras watched everything. The infrastructure was crumbling. Resources were running low. Electricity was unreliable. Despite all this, people were expected to continue living somewhat normal lives. Kids still went to school. People still went to work. But everyone knew Hawkins was no longer a normal town. The Upside Down continued to poison the environment. The plant life kept dying. Strange red storms appeared in the sky, and Vecna was still out there somewhere, his location unknown, planning his next move. From that first disappearance in November 1983 to the quarantine in 1987, Hawkins went from a quiet town where nothing happened to a disaster zone, fighting for survival against an invasion from another dimension. Dozens of people died. Hundreds more were displaced. The town's population dropped as families fled to safer places. Those who remained lived under military occupation, trapped behind fences, unable to escape. The character, Dustin Henderson, summed it up best when he said people were calling Hawkins cursed, and they were not way off. In just 4 years, the town suffered multiple deaths from otherworldly creatures, a gate to another dimension, spreading underground tunnels, a mall fire that killed 30 people, and a catastrophic earthquake that tore the town apart. The federal government declared it a disaster area. The military took control, and the supernatural nightmare showed no signs of ending. For the residents of Hawkins, the curse felt very real, even if most of them did not know the true cause behind their town's string of tragedies and disasters. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Eleven's real identity, Jane Ives, Jane Hopper. The character known as Eleven in Stranger Things has a real name that most people in Hawkins never knew. Her birth name is Jane Ives. She was born on June 7, 1971, to a woman named Terry Ives. By the end of the show's second season, she became legally known as Jane Hopper after being adopted by Police Chief Jim Hopper. This is the story of how a girl named Jane became 11 and how she eventually found her way back to her true identity. Terry Ives was a college student at Indiana University in Bloomington. In 1969, when she was around 18 years old, she volunteered to participate in a government program. The program was run by a scientist named Dr. Martin Brenner. Terry thought she was helping with scientific research about expanding the boundaries of the human mind. What she did not know was that this program was connected to a real government operation called MK-Ultra. MK-Ultra was an actual program run by the Central Intelligence Agency where the government conducted mind control experiments on people. As part of these experiments, Terry took psychedelic drugs like LSD. She was placed in sensory deprivation tanks where she floated in darkness with no light or sound. The experiments were meant to test how these conditions and drugs affected the human mind. During this time, Terry had a boyfriend named Andrew Rich, who was also a college student. Terry became pregnant but did not know it while the experiments were happening. The drugs and procedures she underwent while pregnant would later affect her unborn baby in ways nobody could have predicted. Andrew Rich never got to meet his daughter. Dr. Brenner had Andrew expelled from college, which made him eligible to be drafted into the Vietnam War. Andrew died fighting in Vietnam before he ever learned he was going to be a father. This was not a complete accident. Dr. Brenner wanted Andrew out of the way so it would be easier to take Terry's baby when the time came. On June 7, 1971, Terry gave birth to a baby girl. She named her daughter Jane. Terry saw her baby crying and alive after the birth. She saw Dr. Brenner's face as he lowered his surgical mask. But when Terry woke up from the emergency surgery, her sister Becky told her that the baby had died. The official story was that Terry had a miscarriage. There were no birth certificates or medical records showing that Jane had ever been born alive. Dr. Brenner had taken the baby immediately after birth and covered it up by making everyone believe the child had died. Terry never believed her baby was dead. She knew she had seen Jane alive. She tried to sue the government for stealing her child, but the case was thrown out because she had no proof. Even Terry's own sister Becky believed the miscarriage story. Everyone thought Terry was traumatized and confused, but Terry was right all along. Dr. Brenner took baby Jane to Hawkins National Laboratory in Hawkins, Indiana. The laboratory was supposedly run by the United States Department of Energy, but it was actually conducting secret experiments on people with psychic abilities. Jane became test subject number 11, written as 011. This is where the name 11 came from. She was one of at least 17 children who were taken and experimented on at the lab. The experiments on Terry while she was pregnant had given Jane extraordinary psychokinetic abilities. She could move objects with her mind. She could reach into other people's thoughts. She could even access other dimensions by projecting her consciousness into what they called the void. Dr. Brenner raised Jane as 011, forcing her and the other children to call him Papa. He built himself up as a father figure to these kids while denying them any connection to the outside world. 11 spent her early childhood at Hawkins Lab. She was allowed to play in a room called the Rainbow Room with the other test subjects. Among them was a girl called 8, whose real name was Kali Prasad. The children underwent psychological tests designed to exploit and develop their abilities. 11 was often ostracized and bullied by the other children, but there was a friendly orderly who wore all white who watched over her and gave her advice. In 1974, when 11 was 3 years old, something happened that she would not remember until much later. Terry Ives had armed herself with a gun and broken into Hawkins' lab to rescue her daughter. Terry found the Rainbow Room and saw 11 and Callie playing there. She saw her daughter alive. But before Terry could escape with Jane, lab workers captured her. Dr. Brenner ordered that Terry be subjected to electroshock therapy as punishment. They administered 450 volts of electricity to Terry's head over and over until it caused severe brain damage. The treatment left Terry in a permanent catatonic state. She could barely move or speak. She sat in a chair in her sister McBee's house in Bloomington, repeating the same words over and over. Breathe, sunflower, rainbow, 3 to the right, 4 to the left, 450. These words were fragments of her memories from the day Jane was born and the day she tried to rescue her. Breathe was what Becky told her during labor. Sunflower was the first thing she saw when she woke from surgery. Rainbow referred to the Rainbow Room where she found 11. The numbers were the combination to the safe that held the gun she used to break in, and 450 was the voltage they used to destroy her mind. Years passed. 11 continued to be tested at the lab. In September 1979, when 11 was 8 years old, something terrible happened. The friendly orderly who had been kind to her revealed himself to be test subject number 1. His real name was Henry Creel, and he had been the first child Dr. Brenner experimented on. Henry had killed his own mother and sister back in 1959 using psychic powers. Dr. Brenner had placed a device called a soteria in Henry's neck that suppressed his abilities. Henry manipulated 11 into removing it by making her think he was helping her escape. The orderly showed 11 a drainage pipe in the basement that led out of the building. But after 11 removed the soteria chip, Henry went on a brutal rampage through the laboratory. He used his restored powers to kill almost all the other test subjects and many lab workers. He murdered all of 11's brothers and sisters. When 11 realized what Henry had done, she fought back. In their battle, 11 overpowered Henry and sent him through a temporary gateway into another dimension. This place would later be called the Upside Down. Henry survived there and eventually became the creature known as Vecna. The fight exhausted 11 completely. She fell into a coma and lost her memories of what happened. When she woke up, she could not remember Henry or the massacre. Her powers were also weakened. Dr. Brenner continued experimenting on 11 for 4 more years. By November 1983, when 11 was 12 years old, Dr. Brenner was using her to spy on Soviet spies by having her project her mind into the void. On November 6, 1983, Brenner ordered 11 to make psychic contact with a creature from the Upside Down. This creature was later called the Demogorgon. 11 was placed in a sensory deprivation tank to amplify her abilities. When 11 touched the creature's mind, something went wrong. A gate cracked open in the wall of the tank room. The opening connected their dimension to the Upside Down. the Demogorgon came through into the regular world. Chaos broke out in the laboratory. Scientists panicked. Alarms blared. In the confusion, Eleven escaped through the drainage pipe in the basement that Henry had shown her years earlier, though she did not consciously remember him showing it to her. Eleven fled into the woods wearing only a hospital gown. She wandered through the forest until she found a restaurant called Benny's Burgers. She was starving and tried to steal food. The owner, Benny Hammond, caught her but took pity on her. He gave her a long t-shirt to wear, fed her, and tried to communicate with her. Eleven barely spoke and was terrified of people. Benny called social services, thinking she was a victim of child abuse, but Hawkins' lab was listening in on the call. Agents came to kill Benny and recapture Eleven. Before they could grab her, Eleven ran away again. She ended up hiding in the woods during a rainstorm. 3 boys on bicycles found her. Their names were Mike Wheeler, Dustin Henderson, and Lucas Sinclair. They were searching for their friend Will Byers, who had gone missing the same night Eleven escaped. The boys took Eleven to Mike's basement and hid her from their parents. They asked her what her name was. The only name she knew was the number tattooed on her wrist. She showed them the 011 tattoo. Mike started calling her L for short. Eleven helped the boys search for Will. She used her powers to flip a government van through the air when agents chased them. She located Will in the Upside Down by going into a makeshift sensory deprivation tank made with a kiddie pool and bags of salt. When government forces came to capture her at Hawkins Middle School, Eleven killed many of the agents to protect her new friends. Dr. Brenner confronted her, but the Demogorgon attacked the school. In the final battle, Eleven destroyed the Demogorgon by using all her power. She disappeared in a cloud of ash. Everyone thought she was dead. But Eleven had survived. She woke up in the Upside Down and found a portal back to Hawkins Middle School. With the government still hunting her, she hid in the woods for days. She was cold and hungry and alone. Then she found a box of Eggo waffles that Police Chief Jim Hopper had left in the woods. She sought Hopper out. Hopper had figured out that Eleven was still alive and had been leaving food for her. Hopper took Eleven to his grandfather's old cabin deep in the woods. They stayed there together through most of 1984. Hopper forbade Eleven to leave the cabin because it was too dangerous. Agents might still be looking for her. She grew frustrated being locked inside while Hopper went to work every day. She wanted to see Mike and her friends. They argued often. During one big fight, Eleven accidentally used her powers in anger and damaged the cabin. While cleaning up the mess, Eleven found a cardboard box hidden under the floorboards. Inside were documents from Hawkins' lab. Looking through the files, she discovered her mother's name for the first time, Terry Ives. Hopper had told her that her mother was dead, just like Dr. Brenner had said, but these papers showed Terry was alive. Eleven felt betrayed. She ran away from the cabin and hitchhiked to Bloomington to find her mother. At Terry's house, Eleven met her Aunt Becky for the first time. Becky was shocked when Eleven used her powers to unlock the door. Inside, Eleven found Terry sitting in a chair, staring at nothing, repeating the same words over and over. Something was very wrong with her mother. Terry could not talk or respond normally. Eleven tried to connect with her mentally by using her powers. Through the psychic connection, Eleven saw Terry's memories. She saw herself being born. She saw Dr. Brenner taking her away. She saw Terry breaking into Hawkins' lab and finding her in the Rainbow Room with Kali. She saw the electroshock therapy that destroyed Terry's mind. Eleven finally understood what had been done to her and her mother. She learned that her real name was Jane. She learned that her mother had tried to save her and had been destroyed for trying. The memories also showed Eleven that another test subject named 8 had escaped the lab. Eleven left Terry's house and went to Chicago to find Kali. Kali and her gang were hunting down and killing the people who had worked at Hawkins' lab. They wanted revenge. Kali taught Eleven how to use her anger to fuel her powers. But Eleven realized that killing out of revenge was not who she wanted to be. She sensed through the void that her friends back in Hawkins were in terrible danger from the Mind Flayer. Eleven returned to Hawkins in November 1984. She saved Dustin, Lucas, and Steve Harrington from creatures called Demodogs. She reunited with Mike and her friends. They told her she needed to close the gate to the Upside Down that had opened at Hawkins' lab. Eleven and Hopper went to the laboratory together. On the way there, they had an important conversation. Hopper told Eleven about his daughter Sarah, who had died of cancer. He told Eleven he was afraid of losing her, too. They made peace with each other. At the lab, Eleven used everything Kali had taught her. She focused her anger at Dr. Brenner and everyone who had hurt her and her mother. She channeled that anger into her powers and closed the gate. It took enormous effort and drained her completely, but she succeeded. Hopper embraced her afterward, proud of what she had accomplished. A month later, in December 1984, Hopper met with Dr. Sam Owens, who had taken over as head of Hawkins' lab. Owens handed Hopper a forged birth certificate. The document said Jane Hopper, indicating that Hopper had adopted her as his daughter. It was not a real birth certificate, but it was official enough to allow Eleven to have a legal identity. Her name was no longer 011 or just 11. She was now legally Jane Hopper. Owens warned that Eleven should stay hidden for at least another year to be safe from anyone who might still be hunting her. But Hopper convinced Owens to let her have one night out. On December 15, 1984, Eleven attended the snowball dance at Hawkins Middle School. She wore a nice dress and her hair had grown out. She met Mike there and they danced together. They shared their first kiss. Before the dance, Hopper gave Eleven a special blue hair ribbon. It was the same ribbon his daughter Sarah had worn. It was his way of showing that Eleven was truly his daughter now. Eleven lived with Hopper through 1985. By that summer, she and Mike were dating. She had become close friends with a girl named Max Mayfield. For the first time in her life, Jane was living something close to a normal teenage existence. But then, the Mind Flayer returned to Hawkins. During the battle at Starcourt Mall on July 4, 1985, Eleven lost her powers after being wounded by the Mind Flayer. She also lost Hopper, who was believed to have died in an explosion while destroying a Russian machine. After Hopper's apparent death, Eleven moved in with Joyce Byers and her sons, Jonathan and Will. The Byers family left Hawkins and moved to Lenora Hills, California in October 1985. Eleven went by her birth name Jane at her new high school. She enrolled as a freshman along with Will, while Jonathan became a senior. She struggled to make friends and was bullied by a popular girl named Angela. Her powers still had not returned. She missed Hopper terribly, not knowing he was actually alive in a Russian prison camp. In March 1986, Eleven was taken to a secret facility in Nevada by Dr. Owens. Dr. Brenner was there too, alive despite everyone thinking he had died in 1983. They put Eleven through a program called the Nina Project to help her regain her powers. She was placed in a sensory deprivation tank that made her relive all her memories from childhood at Hawkins' lab. Through these sessions, she finally remembered the massacre that Henry Creel had committed. She remembered the truth about who had killed the other children. She remembered everything. After regaining her full memories and powers, Eleven returned to Hawkins. She reunited with Hopper, who had escaped from Russia with Joyce's help. By November 1987, Eleven was back living with Hopper in Hawkins, which was now under military quarantine. The town was occupied and controlled by soldiers. Hopper was her legal father, and everyone who knew them called her Elle, or Jane. She was no longer just a number. She was Jane Hopper, daughter of Terry Ives and Jim Hopper, girlfriend of Mike Wheeler, friend to a group of loyal kids who had stood by her through everything. The journey from 011 to 11 to Jane was long and painful. A girl who had been stolen from her mother at birth, experimented on, and treated as nothing more than a test subject, had found a real family. She discovered her true name and identity. She learned where she came from. She met what was left of her biological mother, even though Terry could no longer truly be present for her. And she found a father in Jim Hopper, who loved her not for her powers, but for who she was as a person. Jane Ives had been taken away on the day she was born. Jane Hopper had been chosen, had fought for her identity, and had earned the right to be herself. The number 011 tattooed on her wrist would always be there as a reminder of where she came from, but it no longer defined who she was. She was Jane. She was 11. She was Elle. And she was finally, truly home. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Hawkins National Laboratory and Project MK Ultra. Hawkins National Laboratory sits in Hawkins, Indiana, a complex that looks like any other government research facility. The building supposedly operates under the United States Department of Energy. The lab even controls a local subsidiary called Hawkins Power and Light. On the surface, Hawkins Lab appears to be a normal scientific research center doing work for the Department of Energy. But that official story serves as a cover for what really happens inside the building. The truth is that Hawkins National Laboratory conducts secret experiments on people with psychic abilities. Some people suspected that the Department of Energy was just a front, and that other agencies like the Central Intelligence Agency or the National Security Agency actually controlled the lab. Whether the CIA or NSA ran things behind the scenes, Hawkins Lab was established after World War II as one of several national laboratories across the United States. These labs grew out of the scientific work done during the war, particularly the Manhattan Project that created the atomic bomb. From the 1950s through the 1970s, Hawkins Lab participated in a real government program called MK Ultra. MK Ultra was an actual operation run by the CIA. The program lasted from 1953 to 1973. The goal was to develop mind control techniques that could be used against enemies during the Cold War. The program tested ways to manipulate people's mental states and alter how their brains work. At Hawkins Lab, MK Ultra experiments began in 1953 under the direction of a scientist named Dr. Martin Brenner. The real MK Ultra program subjected test subjects to extreme conditions. Many people who participated did not know what they were getting into. Some did not even know they were part of experiments. The program used psychedelic drugs like LSD on people. Test subjects underwent physical and mental abuse. They were deprived of sleep. They were starved and malnourished. They experienced electroshock therapy. Many suffered through sensory deprivation in special tanks. The real MK Ultra program led to several deaths before it was shut down in 1973. At Hawkins Lab, Dr. Brenner had a different plan for how to use MK Ultra. He wanted to create people with psychic powers. In 1959, a woman named Virginia Creel contacted Brenner because she believed her son Henry was responsible for strange things happening at their house. After Virginia and Henry's sister Alice were found dead and Henry was knocked unconscious, everyone assumed Henry's father Victor had killed them. But Brenner realized that Henry had done it using psychic powers. Henry not only could kill people with his mind, but also had impressive psychokinetic abilities. Dr. Brenner told the Creel family that Henry had died from shock, but Brenner actually took Henry to Hawkins Lab. Henry woke up from his coma to find he was now a prisoner. Brenner put a small device called a soteria into Henry's neck. The chip suppressed Henry's powers and monitored everything he did. Brenner designated Henry as 001, making him the first test subject. Henry Creel became known as 1. Brenner wanted to recreate Henry's abilities in other people. He decided the best way was to experiment on pregnant women and affect their babies while still in the womb. One participant in these experiments was a college student named Terry Ives. Terry volunteered for what she thought was scientific research to expand the boundaries of the human mind. She took psychedelic drugs, especially LSD, and was placed in sensory deprivation tanks. Terry did not know she was pregnant during these experiments. The drugs and procedures affected Terry's unborn baby. When Terry gave birth to a daughter named Jane on June 7, 1971, the baby was born with extraordinary psychokinetic abilities. Dr. Brenner immediately took Jane from Terry at birth. He covered it up by telling everyone the baby had died. There were no birth certificates or medical records showing Jane had been born alive. Brenner brought Jane to Hawkins Lab and designated her as test subject 011, which became known as 11. Brenner successfully created other children with psychic abilities the same way. He took babies from pregnant women who had participated in MK Ultra experiments. All these children were taken from their mothers at birth. Brenner raised at least 18 children at Hawkins Lab as test subjects. They were narrower from 001 to 018. Each child had a number tattooed on their wrist. These numbered children grew up knowing nothing except life inside Hawkins Lab. Dr. Brenner built himself up as a father figure to them. He made all the children call him Papa. The kids thought of each other as brothers and sisters, though they were not related by blood. Among the test subjects were 1, Henry Creel, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whose real name was Kali Prasad, 9, 10, 11, Jane Ives, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. The children were kept strictly confined to the lab premises. Nobody outside Hawkins Lab knew these kids existed. Their existence was kept top secret by the government. The children were allowed to play together in a room called the Rainbow Room. This room had colorful decorations and toys. It looked almost normal, like a kindergarten classroom. But even in the Rainbow Room, the children were always being watched and monitored. Dr. Brenner and his staff conducted psychological tests on the children to exploit and develop their abilities. Each child showed different types of psychic powers. 1 and 11 had telekinetic abilities, meaning they could move objects with their minds. 8 developed the ability to create illusions and make people see things that were not really there. Other children had different powers. Some could predict the future. Some could manipulate minds. Some could start fires just by thinking about it. The experiments were designed to weaponize these powers. The government wanted to create psychic soldiers who could be used against enemies like the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The children underwent training exercises where they would use their powers to destroy objects or manipulate things mentally. At one point, Eleven was even instructed to kill a cat using only her mind, though she refused to do it. One of the main tools used at Hawkins' lab was the sensory deprivation tank. These tanks are real devices that were actually developed in the 1950s. A sensory deprivation tank is filled with water mixed with large amounts of Epsom salt. The salt makes people float without touching the bottom or sides. The tank is completely dark inside with no light. It is silent with no sound. The water is heated to match body temperature, so people cannot even feel where their skin ends and the water begins. When placed in a sensory deprivation tank, a person experiences almost no input to their senses. They cannot see, hear, touch, or feel anything. This state of complete isolation was believed to affect how the brain works. Some researchers thought sensory deprivation could unlock psychic abilities or expand consciousness. At Hawkins' lab, the children were regularly placed in sensory deprivation tanks to amplify their psychic powers. For 11 and some other subjects, the sensory deprivation tank allowed them to project their consciousness into what they called the void. In the void, they could observe people in different physical locations. They could spy on people from far away. 11 could see and hear Russian agents from inside the tank at Hawkins' lab. This ability was called remote viewing. The government wanted to use it to spy on Soviet enemies. The test subjects were also exposed to psychedelic drugs as part of their training and experiments. Just like the real MKUltra program used LSD on people, Hawkins' lab continued using drugs to test and push the children's abilities. The combination of drugs, sensory deprivation, and constant psychological pressure was designed to make the children's powers stronger. Life at Hawkins' lab was not easy for the test subjects. Many of the children bullied each other. 2, the oldest of the numbered children after 1, was particularly mean. He mocked and tormented the weaker kids, especially 11. The children competed against each other in training exercises. They would try to psychically push each other off mats or manipulate light bulbs with their minds. Brenner pitted them against each other to see who was strongest. If the children misbehaved or failed to follow orders, they faced punishment. 11 was sometimes locked in a small, cramped room for hours as punishment. The children lived in fear of disappointing Papa Brenner. Despite how he treated them, they craved his approval because he was the only parent figure they knew. Only one person showed kindness to 11 during her childhood at the lab. There was a friendly orderly who wore all white and worked at the facility. He watched over 11 and gave her advice on how to better control her powers. He told her to use her emotions, particularly anger and sadness, to fuel her abilities. What 11 did not know was that this orderly was actually Henry Creel. He was 1, wearing a disguise and pretending to be just a worker. One girl named 8, whose real name was Kali Prasad, managed to escape from Hawkins' lab before September 1979. Kali had been abducted from London, England in 1969 when she was 5 years old. Dr. Brenner and his agents took her from her home and brought her to Indiana. Kali grew tired of the abuse at the lab. She used her illusion-creating abilities to trick the guards and escape. After getting away, Kali went to Chicago, where she later formed a gang and hunted down former Hawkins lab workers to get revenge. In September 1979, everything changed at Hawkins' lab. Henry Creel, who had been working as an orderly, manipulated 11 into removing the Soteria chip from his neck. Once his powers were restored, Henry went on a brutal rampage through the laboratory. He systematically murdered almost all the other test subjects. He killed 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. He also killed many lab workers and scientists. Henry wanted 11 to join him. He explained that he had killed his own mother and sister years earlier because he saw himself as a predator meant to purge weakness from humanity. He wanted to destroy the world and remake it, but 11 refused. She fought back against Henry using all her power. In their battle in the Rainbow Room, 11 overpowered him and opened a temporary gateway to another dimension. Henry was pulled through the gateway and sent to the place that would later be called the Upside Down. After the massacre, only 11 and Dr. Brenner survived. 11 fell into a coma from exhaustion. When she woke up, she had lost her memories of what happened. She did not remember Henry or 1. She could not remember the massacre. Her powers were also significantly weaker than before. Dr. Brenner told her that she had killed everyone, making Eleven believe she was responsible for murdering her brothers and sisters. For the next 4 years, from 1979 to 1983, Eleven was the only remaining test subject at Hawkins' lab. Dr. Brenner focused all his attention on her. He continued experimenting and testing her abilities. He used the sensory deprivation tank to make Eleven spy on Russian agents. He was trying to discover what had happened to Henry Creel by pushing Eleven to explore dimensions with her mind. On November 6, 1983, Dr. Brenner ordered Eleven to make psychic contact with a creature she encountered in the void. This monster would later be called the Demogorgon. Eleven was placed in the sensory deprivation tank and entered a deep psychic state. When she touched the creature's mind, something went wrong. A gate opened in the wall of the tank room. The gateway connected their world to the Upside Down. The Demogorgon came through into the regular world. Chaos erupted at Hawkins' lab. Scientists panicked. Alarms sounded. In the confusion, Eleven escaped through a drainage pipe in the basement and fled into the woods. The lab's entire east wing was evacuated. The underground complex was sealed off. Dr. Brenner sent agents to search for Eleven and recapture her. At the same time, lab workers investigated the gate and discovered strange tendrils and membranes spreading from it into the facility. The lab tried to cover up what happened. When Will Byers was taken by the Demogorgon that same night, lab agents created a fake body and staged it to look like Will had drowned in a quarry. When Benny Hammond, a local restaurant owner, tried to help Eleven, lab agents killed him and staged it to look like suicide. The lab monitored phone calls around Hawkins. They tracked anyone who might know about Eleven or the gate. They posed as workers from Hawkins Power and Light to investigate areas where the Demogorgon had been. After Eleven destroyed the Demogorgon in late November 1983, Dr. Brenner was believed to have been killed during the attack. A new director named Dr. Sam Owens took over Hawkins' lab. Owens knew about the gate and the experiments, but wanted to handle things differently than Brenner. He tried to contain the gate as it slowly grew larger. He monitored the environment around Hawkins as tunnels from the Upside Down spread beneath the town. In November 1984, Eleven returned to Hawkins' lab with Jim Hopper. She used her powers to close the gate and stop the Upside Down from spreading further. After successfully closing it, Dr. Owens helped Hopper legally adopt Eleven. He gave Hopper a forged birth certificate with the name Jane Hopper on it. Owens also worked with the lab to cover up what had really happened to Barbara Holland, a girl who was killed by the Demogorgon in 1983. By late 1984, reporters Nancy Wheeler and Jonathan Byers, working with a man named Murray Bauman, exposed part of what happened at Hawkins' lab. They released a recording where Dr. Owens confessed to covering up Barbara's death. The story was that Barbara died from exposure to an experimental chemical leak. This watered-down version of the truth was enough to force the Department of Energy to shut down Hawkins' lab. In December 1984, military police locked the facility. The lab was officially closed. By July 1985, Hawkins' lab was completely abandoned. When Joyce Byers and Jim Hopper broke into the empty building, they found nothing but deserted hallways and rooms. All the bad men were gone. The experiments had ended. The children who had been raised there were either dead, escaped, or in Eleven's case, finally free. Hawkins National Laboratory stands as a dark chapter in the history of Hawkins, Indiana. What appeared to be a normal Department of Energy research facility was actually a site where children were stolen from their mothers, imprisoned their entire lives, experimented on with drugs and sensory deprivation, and trained to be psychic weapons. At least 17 children died in September 1979. Many more suffered years of abuse and manipulation. Only 11 and 8 survived, carrying the trauma of their experiences for the rest of their lives. The real MKUltra program was exposed in the 1970s and officially ended in 1973. But at Hawkins' lab, those experiments continued in secret for another decade, focused on creating children with supernatural abilities. The legacy of Hawkins' lab and its connection to MKUltra shows how far the government was willing to go in the name of national security and Cold War paranoia, sacrificing children's lives and futures for the possibility of gaining an advantage over enemy nations. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Upside Down, a parallel hostile dimension. This hostile realm became the central supernatural threat in Hawkins, Indiana, when a gateway between the two dimensions was accidentally opened on November 6, 1983. The dimension mirrors the real world, but exists as a terrifying dark copy filled with dangerous creatures and toxic air. Understanding how this dimension works and how it connects to Hawkins explains most of the supernatural events that terrorized the town for years. The story of the Upside Down actually begins 4 years before anyone in Hawkins knew it existed. On September 8, 1979, 11 fought Henry Creel, also known as Subject 1, inside Hawkins National Laboratory. During their psychic battle in the Rainbow Room, 11 overpowered Henry and used her abilities to disintegrate his body. As his body turned to dust, a temporary gate opened in the wall and pulled Henry through before sealing up again. This gate transported Henry to a realm between dimensions, where he fell through space while being constantly struck by lightning. The lightning damaged his body and began transforming him into something barely recognizable as human. He eventually landed in an alternate dimension that he would later describe as a realm unspoiled by mankind. This dimension that Henry landed in was completely different from the Upside Down that would appear 4 years later. The place Henry arrived in was a desolate wasteland with floating rocks, scorched skies, vines growing everywhere, and storm-like masses of dark particles floating in the air. There were humanoid predators, flying bat-like creatures, and other dangerous life forms living in this dimension. Henry discovered he could use his psychokinetic abilities to reshape and control the dark particles in this realm. He created a hive mind that connected all the creatures and life in this dimension, allowing him to control them. This older dimension has been referred to in production materials as Dimension X, and it was the original home of all the creatures that would later appear in Hawkins. The Upside Down, as characters know it, did not exist until November 6, 1983. On that date, Dr. Martin Brenner at Hawkins National Laboratory instructed 11 to make psychic contact with an interdimensional creature. 11 was placed in a sensory deprivation tank filled with salt water that allowed her to enter a deep psychic state and amplify her remote viewing abilities. While spying on a Russian agent from within her mental void, 11 accidentally encountered a monster. This creature was a Demogorgon, one of the predatory creatures from the dimension where Henry had been living since 1979. Brenner then specifically asked 11 to make direct contact with the Demogorgon while it was feeding on a large yellow egg. The moment 11 touched the creature, a gate cracked open in the wall of the tank room at Hawkins' lab. This gate was different from the temporary gate that had opened when 11 banished Henry in 1979. This new gate stayed open instead of immediately sealing shut. The gate would eventually be called the Mother Gate because of how significant it became. But something even more dramatic happened in that moment of contact. The older dimension that Henry had been living in transformed in appearance, or possibly a completely new dimension was created. Either way, the Upside Down came into existence at that exact moment. The Upside Down was a perfect mirror copy of Hawkins, Indiana. Every building, every house, every street existed in the Upside Down exactly as it appeared in the real world. But there was one crucial difference. The Upside Down version of Hawkins was frozen on the date November 6, 1983. Time did not move forward in the Upside Down. This frozen state would not be discovered until March 1986, when Nancy Wheeler entered the Upside Down and went to her bedroom expecting to find her hidden guns. The guns were not there because she had purchased them after November 6, 1983. She then looked at her diary and realized the last entry was dated November 6, 1983. The Upside Down was stuck at the exact moment when 11 opened the first gate. The physical environment of the Upside Down was hostile to human life. The dimension was dark and cold with toxic air. Everything was covered in vines, spores, and strange biological membranes. The sky appeared as a swirling mass of dark particles and lightning. There was no sun, only darkness. Floating particles drifted through the air like ash or snow. The vines were alive and connected to the hive mind that Henry controlled. The entire dimension seemed to be one giant living organism. The air was so toxic that humans who spent too much time in the Upside Down would become sick. Will Byers would later describe the air as tasting wrong and making him feel cold even after he escaped. The Mother Gate at Hawkins' lab was located deep underground in the facility. Unlike the temporary gates that would appear elsewhere, the Mother Gate did not heal or close on its own. In fact, it only grew larger over time. Biological growth from the Upside Down began spreading out from the gate into the laboratory itself. Vines and strange organic matter crept through the facility. The gate disrupted the local electromagnetic field in a major way. Compasses in Hawkins stopped pointing to magnetic north and instead pointed directly at the Mother Gate. This is how Mike, Dustin, and Lucas were able to locate the gate in November 1983 by following their compasses. The Demogorgon that 11 made contact with was able to travel through the Mother Gate into the real world. This humanoid predator stood over 6 feet tall and had no visible eyes. Its head would open like a flower petal to reveal rows of teeth. The creature hunted by smell and sound instead of sight. On the same night the gate opened, November 6, 1983, the Demogorgon found Will Byers riding his bicycle home from Mike Wheeler's house. The creature took Will back through the gate into the Upside Down. Will spent a week trapped in that hostile dimension, hiding and running from the Demogorgon while slowly being infected by the environment. The Demogorgon had the ability to create its own temporary gates. These gates appeared as tears or wounds in solid surfaces like walls and trees. They would stretch open like flesh being pulled apart and were surrounded by organic material from the Upside Down. The Demogorgon used these temporary gates to travel back and forth between dimensions to hunt. It created a gate in the wall of the Byers house, which is how Joyce Byers saw the wall bulging and distorting when something tried to push through from the other side. The creature created another gate at Hawkins Middle School. These temporary gates would heal and close up after the Demogorgon passed through them, unlike the Mother Gate, which remained open. Joyce Byers and Police Chief Jim Hopper entered the Upside Down through the Mother Gate on November 12, 1983, to search for Will. They had to wear hazmat suits because of the toxic environment. They found Will in the upside-down version of the public library, where he had been webbed to the wall with vine-like tentacles down his throat. The creature was using Will as a host, or storing him for later. Hopper cut Will free and performed CPR. Then they carried him back through the gate to the real world. Will survived, but remained connected to the Upside Down in ways that would become clear later. After these events, Dr. Sam Owens took over as the Director of Operations at Hawkins Lab. The facility kept the Mother Gate contained, but could not close it. By 1984, the gate had grown to an enormous size, reaching far below the laboratory. The Mind Flayer, which was the hive mind entity that Henry controlled, used the Mother Gate to spread the Upside Down's toxic biological growth. A series of tunnels grew underground beneath Hawkins, branching out from the gate like the roots of a massive tree. These tunnels were covered in vines and organic matter from the Upside Down. The lab would periodically burn the biological growth to try to contain it, but the gate kept growing larger. The tunnels beneath Hawkins became a network that connected different parts of town. Creatures called Demodogs, which were adolescent Demogorgons, used these tunnels for transportation. The tunnels were alive and connected to the hive mind. When Hopper and Bob Newby explored the tunnels in October 1984, they discovered the entire underground system was one massive organism. The vines would react to threats, and when humans burned parts of the tunnel system, other parts would sense it and the creatures would attack. The Mind Flayer could see through the eyes of any creature connected to the hive mind, which meant it knew everything happening in the tunnels. Will Byers had been infected during his time in the Upside Down. When he was rescued, a slug-like creature came out of his mouth and went down his bathroom drain. Throughout 1984, Will experienced visions of the Mind Flayer and felt psychically connected to the Upside Down. He could sense when the tunnels were being burned and when the Mind Flayer was nearby. The Mind Flayer eventually possessed Will completely in October 1984, using him to spy on the humans and control the Demodogs. Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy were able to drive the Mind Flayer out of Will by heating his body in Jonathan's room, making the environment too hot for the creature that preferred the cold. Eleven was the only person with the power to close the Mother Gate. On November 4, 1984, Eleven used her abilities to seal the gate shut. She had to focus all her psychic energy for an extended period, pushing the organic growth back and forcing the gate to close. The gate sealed completely, cutting off the Mind Flayer's connection to the real world. The tunnels beneath Hawkins stopped growing, and the immediate threat ended. However, this was only a temporary halt to the Upside Down's incursion into Hawkins. The Mind Flayer remained in the Upside Down after the gate closed. On December 15, 1984, the creature loomed over the Upside Down version of Hawkins Middle School. Although the gate was closed, the Mind Flayer could somehow sense Eleven's presence on the other side during the snowball dance. The dimensional barrier between worlds was still healing from the damage caused by the Mother Gate. Dr. Alexei, a Soviet scientist, would later explain that Hawkins remained vulnerable because of this damage. The fabric of reality had been torn and was slowly repairing itself, which created a weakness that could be exploited. The Soviet Union learned about the events in Hawkins through their intelligence network. In June 1984, the Soviets began their own experiments in opening gates to the Upside Down. They built a machine called the Key that would generate enough energy to open a gate. However, their keys kept failing when tested in Russia. The gates would briefly open before immediately closing and causing massive energy outbursts. The Soviet scientists realized the key was only half of the equation. The location where the key was used mattered because the dimensional barrier was thicker in most places. But in Hawkins, where the barrier was still healing from the Mother Gate, it was weaker and more vulnerable. The Soviets built a secret base beneath the new Starcourt Mall in Hawkins in 1985. They brought their key to Hawkins specifically because the dimensional barrier was weakest there. On June 28, 1985, they successfully opened a new gate using their machine. This Soviet gate was located underneath the mall in a secret underground facility. The Soviets used the gate to study the Upside Down and potentially weaponize it. The Mind Flayer sensed the new gate opening and took the opportunity to send part of itself through into the real world. The Mind Flayer possessed numerous people in Hawkins, creating the Flayed, who acted as extensions of the hive mind. The Soviet gate remained open throughout the summer of 1985. Hopper, Joyce, and Murray Bauman infiltrated the Soviet base on July 4, 1985, and destroyed the key machine. When the machine was destroyed, the gate collapsed and closed. However, the Mind Flayer had already sent a significant portion of itself into the real world by that point. Billy Hargrove had been possessed and transformed into the main host for the Mind Flayer. The creature built a massive physical body out of the melted remains of the Flayed. 11 fought this Mind Flayer body at Starcourt Mall while Hopper destroyed the key. When the gate closed, the Mind Flayer's body lost its connection to the hive mind and dissolved into lifeless organic matter. Between July 1985 and March 1986, no gates were opened between the dimensions. But Henry Creel, who had fully transformed into the creature called Vecna, had been planning a new strategy. Vecna had figured out how to open gates from within the Upside Down by forming powerful psychic connections with humans in the real world. Just as the psychic connection between Eleven and the Demogorgon had opened the Mother Gate in 1983, Vecna could create similar connections to open new gates. He strategically targeted teenagers in Hawkins who were experiencing trauma or mental health issues. Vecna would enter the minds of his victims and subject them to disturbing hallucinations. He would psychologically torture them before killing them through psychic means. When Vecna killed a victim, a new gate would open at the location where the victim died. On March 21, 1986, Vecna killed Chrissy Cunningham at the Forest Hills Trailer Park, opening a gate in Eddie Munson's trailer. On March 22nd, he killed Fred Benson near Lover's Lake, opening a gate there. On March 25th, he killed Patrick McKinney in Lover's Lake itself, opening a water gate beneath the surface. These new gates allowed people to travel into the Upside Down again. On March 26, 1986, Steve Harrington was pulled through the water gate by creatures called Demobats. Nancy Wheeler, Robin Buckley, and Eddie Munson jumped through the gate to rescue him. They found themselves in the upside-down version of Lover's Lake. The Demobats were flying, bat-like creatures with wings and sharp teeth that attacked in swarms. The group traveled through the Upside Down to the Forest Hills Trailer Park to use the gate in Eddie's trailer to return to the real world. This was when Nancy discovered that the Upside Down was frozen on November 6, 1983, by finding her old diary and missing guns. The group also discovered they could communicate between dimensions through sound and through particles. When Dustin Henderson called out to them from the real world, they could hear an echo of his voice slipping through dimensions. Nancy noticed floating golden particles in the Upside Down that, when touched, affected electrical activity in the real world. By manipulating a Light-Bright toy in the Upside Down, they could create light patterns that appeared in the real world, allowing them to communicate. Vecna attempted to kill Max Mayfield on March 27, 1986, which would have opened a fourth gate. Max was his ideal victim because she was suffering from survivor's guilt after watching Billy die. Vecna pulled her into his mindscape and prepared to kill her the same way he killed his other victims. But Max's friends played her favorite song, Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, through her Walkman. The music anchored Max to reality and gave her the strength to escape from Vecna's mindscape. She survived, but Vecna marked her for death and would return for her later. On March 29, 1986, Nancy, Steve, Robin, and Eddie traveled back into the Upside Down through Eddie's trailer gate to fight Vecna. They split up, with Nancy, Steve, and Robin going to attack Vecna at the Creel house, while Eddie and Dustin stayed behind to distract the Demobats. Meanwhile, Eleven used her remote viewing abilities to enter Max's mind and protect her from Vecna. Vecna attacked Max again in the Creel house attic, breaking her arms, legs, and jaw and causing her to lose her vision. He killed her for approximately 1 minute before Eleven fought him off in Max's mindscape. Nancy, Steve, and Robin also attacked Vecna's physical body with shotguns and Molotov cocktails, setting him on fire. Max was clinically dead for over a minute before Eleven used her powers to restart Max's heart. Max survived but fell into a coma. But Vecna had held the psychic connection long enough. 4 gates opened at the locations where Vecna had killed or nearly killed his victims. These 4 gates then began spreading and growing larger. They moved across Hawkins like massive cracks in reality, destroying everything in their path. The 4 gates converged at the center of town, creating a giant X-shaped rift. When they merged, the ground shook with a 7.4 magnitude earthquake that killed 22 people and destroyed much of downtown Hawkins. The merged gates created a massive open rift between dimensions right in the center of Hawkins. By November 1987, over 500 days after the gates opened, the military had established a base called Max-Z around the central portal. Hawkins was under federal quarantine, with fences surrounding the town and residents trapped inside. The Upside Down was bleeding into reality on a larger scale than ever before. Red lightning flashed in the sky over the town, similar to the lightning in the Upside Down itself. The dimensional barrier had been catastrophically damaged, and the 2 worlds were beginning to merge. The Upside Down represents the central supernatural threat in Stranger Things because it connects all the other dangers. The Demogorgon, the Mind Flayer, Vecna, and all the other creatures come from this dimension. Every major crisis in Hawkins has involved gates opening between the normal world and the Upside Down. Closing the gates has always been a temporary solution because the dimensional barrier keeps getting damaged. The frozen state of the Upside Down on November 6, 1983 remains unexplained. Why that specific date trapped the dimension in time is one of the biggest mysteries left to be revealed. The answer likely connects to Will Byers disappearing on that same date and the role he may still play in the final battle against the Upside Down's invasion of the real world. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Mind Flayer, a hive mind shadow entity. The Mind Flayer is a massive, shadowy entity made of countless tiny particles that functions as the central intelligence controlling the Upside Down. This creature stands at least 50 stories tall and has a distinctive spider-like appearance with multiple tentacle-like appendages extending from its body. The entity exercises complete control over the Upside Down through a psychic connection called a hive mind that links all creatures and life forms in that dimension. Everything in the Upside Down, including demogorgons, demodogs, demobats, and the vines covering every surface, shares this collective consciousness with the Mind Flayer at the center. When one part of the hive mind feels pain, all connected beings experience that same pain. The entire dimension essentially functions as one gigantic superorganism, with the Mind Flayer serving as its brain. The true origin of the Mind Flayer was revealed in 1986, when Vecna explained what happened after Eleven banished him to another dimension in 1979. When Henry Creel first arrived in that realm on September 8, 1979, he found himself in a place he would later describe as unspoiled by mankind. This was not yet the Upside Down as characters would come to know it. Instead, it was an older dimension called Dimension X that existed before the Upside Down was created. Henry fell through space between dimensions, constantly struck by lightning that burned and disfigured his body. This lightning damage began his physical transformation into the monster called Vecna. When he finally landed in Dimension X, he discovered a desolate wasteland with floating rocks, scorched skies, and various dangerous creatures including demogorgons and flying bat-like beings. The most significant discovery Henry made in Dimension X was a massive swirling cloud of dark particles. These particles floated in the air like a storm and seemed to possess some form of collective consciousness, or at least the potential for one. Henry, who still retained his psychokinetic abilities from when he was Subject 1 at Hawkins' lab, realized he could manipulate these particles with his mind. He had always been fascinated with spiders as a child, particularly black widow spiders, which he viewed as the ultimate predator. Using his powers, Henry reached out to the particle cloud and began reshaping it. He molded the formless mass into a giant spider-like creature with a flame-shaped head and multiple tentacle-like appendages. This creation matched drawings Henry had made as a child living in the Creel house. The Mind Flayer was born from Henry's manipulation of these pre-existing particles. By taking control of the particles and shaping them into the Mind Flayer, Henry gained the ability to create and control a hive mind. He could now connect his consciousness to all the creatures living in Dimension X, and later, the Upside Down. The Demogorgons, Demobats, Vines, and every other life form in that dimension became extensions of Henry's will through the Mind Flayer. Henry essentially became the Mind Flayer in the sense that his consciousness directed its actions. The spider-like form served as a vessel through which Henry could extend his influence across vast distances and through multiple beings simultaneously. This meant Henry could see through the eyes of any creature connected to the hive mind and control their actions completely. The relationship between Henry and the Mind Flayer remained unclear, even to Henry himself. He believed he had created and controlled the entity entirely. However, there is evidence suggesting the particles may have influenced Henry long before 1979. As a child in the 1950s, Henry had briefly visited Dimension X and encountered the particles, which may have given him his psychokinetic powers in the first place. Whether Henry truly controlled the Mind Flayer, or whether the particles were using Henry to achieve their own goals, remained ambiguous. What was certain was that by 1983, when Eleven opened the Mother Gate at Hawkins' lab, Henry had full access to a powerful tool for invading the human world. The Mind Flayer first attacked Hawkins in October 1984. Will Byers, who had been trapped in the Upside Down for a week in November 1983, continued experiencing visions of that dimension throughout 1984. On October 29, 1984, while at the Palace Arcade with his friends, Will had another vision where he saw himself in an abandoned version of the arcade in the Upside Down. The next day, during a field trip, Will's friends found a strange, slug-like creature in a storm drain. Dustin kept the creature as a pet and named it D'Artagnan. Will heard the creature making noises and realized he had heard those same sounds during his visions, confirming the creature came from the Upside Down. Will's stepfather, Bob Newby, tried to help Will overcome his fears by telling him to stand his ground and face the visions directly. Bob meant well, but did not understand that Will was dealing with something genuinely dangerous. When Will tried to confront the shadow monster in his next vision, the Mind Flayer took the opportunity to possess him. The possession happened gradually at first. Will experienced what he called episodes, where he would find himself in the upside-down version of wherever he was standing. During these episodes, Will could see the Mind Flayer looming in the sky as a massive, dark, spider-like shape made of swirling particles. After the Mind Flayer fully possessed Will, his behavior changed dramatically. He began demanding that the house be kept extremely cold because heat was painful to the Mind Flayer. Will's memory became unreliable, and he would experience what he called now memories, which were actually the Mind Flayer's thoughts and sensations bleeding into Will's consciousness. Dr. Sam Owens at Hawkins' lab examined Will and concluded he was connected to a hive mind. When soldiers from the lab burned some of the underground tunnels that the Mind Flayer had grown beneath Hawkins, Will collapsed in agony because he felt the pain through his connection to the hive mind. Will was not just possessed by the Mind Flayer, but had become part of the larger organism that was the Upside Down itself. The Mind Flayer used its possession of Will to spy on Hawkins' lab and the people trying to stop it. Will could see and hear everything happening around him, and the Mind Flayer accessed those memories. When Hopper became trapped in the underground tunnels, Will provided information that helped locate him. However, after Hopper was rescued and the lab prepared to burn more of the tunnel system, the Mind Flayer manipulated Will into leading the soldiers into a trap. Will gave them coordinates to a location he claimed he could not see, which seemed safe. But the Mind Flayer had deceived Will and used him to send the soldiers directly into an ambush where Demodogs killed most of them. Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy realized they needed to drive the Mind Flayer out of Will's body. They remembered that Will had mentioned wanting to stay cold and that heat caused him pain when the tunnels were burned. They took Will to the Byers house and isolated him in Jonathan's room. They covered the windows to block out all light and turned on heat lamps. Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy spent hours talking to Will about his memories, trying to reach the real Will underneath the Mind Flayer's control. Will fought against them, writhing and screaming in pain as the temperature rose. At one point, they even burned his arm with a hot fire poker to drive the Mind Flayer out with extreme heat. Eventually, the heat became too much for the fragment of the Mind Flayer possessing Will. The particles could not withstand the high temperature. The possessed Will shrieked and convulsed before the black particles fled from his mouth. The particles flew out of the house and disappeared into the night sky, returning to the main body of the Mind Flayer in the Upside Down. Will was free from possession, but retained a connection to the hive mind. He could still sense when the Mind Flayer was active and close by, describing the sensation as feeling cold and frightened, like the drop on a roller coaster, but much worse. On November 4, 1984, Eleven used her powers to close the Mother Gate at Hawkins' lab. The gate had grown enormous over the past year, reaching deep underground with tunnels spreading throughout Hawkins. Eleven focused all her energy on forcing the gate shut, pushing back the organic growth from the Upside Down and sealing the rift. When the gate closed, it severed the psychic connection between the Mind Flayer and the creatures in Hawkins. All the Demodogs that had been attacking people dropped dead instantly when their connection to the hive mind was cut. The Mind Flayer itself could no longer directly influence events in the human world. However, a fragment of the Mind Flayer had been inside Will, and that fragment escaped his body before the gate closed. This piece of the Mind Flayer remained trapped in the human world. The dormant fragment of the Mind Flayer stayed at Brimborn Steelworks, an abandoned factory in Hawkins. On December 15, 1984, the Mind Flayer loomed over the upside-down version of Hawkins Middle School during the Snowball Dance. Although the gate was closed, the creature could somehow sense Eleven's presence on the other side. The dimensional barrier between worlds was healing from the damage caused by the Mother Gate, but Hawkins remained vulnerable. This weakness is what allowed the Soviet Union to successfully open a new gate beneath Starcourt Mall in the summer of 1985. On June 28, 1985, the Soviets activated their key machine and opened a gate to the Upside Down. The moment this new gate opened, the psychic connection between dimensions was re-established. The fragment of the Mind Flayer at Brimborn Steelworks immediately reawakened. The creature began possessing swarms of rats, forcing them to consume toxic chemicals like fertilizer and cleaning products. These possessed rats would then explode into puddles of biological material that the Mind Flayer used to build itself a physical body in the human world. An elderly woman named Doris Driscoll was bitten by one of these infected rats and became the first human possessed by the Mind Flayer in 1985. On June 29, 1985, Billy Hargrove was driving down Cherry Oak Drive when he suddenly crashed his car. Billy got out to investigate and found himself near the abandoned Brimborn Steelworks. A massive tendril made of the rat biomass emerged from the darkness and dragged Billy into the basement of the factory. There, the creature pumped toxic material into Billy's face and infected him with particles from the Mind Flayer. Billy became what would be called one of the flayed, humans whose minds were hijacked by the Mind Flayer and connected to its hive mind. Unlike Will Byers, who retained some ability to resist the Mind Flayer's control, the flayed of 1985 were almost completely subservient to the entity. Billy was the Mind Flayer's primary host and main agent in Hawkins. The next day, Billy went to work at the Hawkins community pool as if nothing had happened, but his behavior was strange. He kidnapped his fellow lifeguard Heather Holloway and brought her to Brimborn Steelworks, where she too was infected and became one of the flayed. Billy and Heather then worked together to capture Heather's parents, Tom and Janet Holloway. The Mind Flayer was building an army of flayed humans to serve its purposes. All of the flayed developed an intense psychological attachment to Brimborn Steelworks and would gather there when not pretending to live their normal lives. The flayed exhibited behaviors different from Will's possession. They consumed large quantities of chemicals and toxic substances, including fertilizer, cleaning products, and other poisonous materials. This chemical consumption was the Mind Flayer's way of inducing a reaction in their bodies. The chemicals would break down the flayed's flesh and bones into a liquid biomass that could be used to construct a larger physical body for the Mind Flayer. Some of the flayed were not immediately melted down, but kept alive to help capture more people. Billy was kept alive because of his physical strength and because he was Max's stepbrother, making him useful for getting close to the party members who opposed the Mind Flayer. Will Byers could sense when the Mind Flayer was active through his lingering connection to the hive mind. On July 3, 1985, Will felt the familiar cold sensation on the back of his neck while at the movies with his friends. He realized the Mind Flayer was back and active in Hawkins. The next day, Will sensed Billy attacking Heather's parents and realized the Mind Flayer was possessing people again. Will explained to his friends that Billy had activated and deactivated states. When the Mind Flayer was not actively controlling Billy, he was mostly himself, but still part of the hive mind. When the Mind Flayer needed direct control, it would activate Billy and take over his actions completely. Max, Eleven, Mike, Lucas, and Will decided to test whether Billy was truly possessed. They lured him into the sauna at the Hawkins community pool and locked him inside. By raising the temperature with the heat turned up, they exploited the Mind Flayer's weakness to heat. Billy initially seemed normal, even hurt that Max would trap him. He apologized and said he tried to stop the terrible things he had done, but when the temperature rose high enough, the Mind Flayer activated. Billy's personality changed instantly. He became violent and aggressive, displaying superhuman strength. He broke through the sauna door and attacked the group. Eleven used her powers to throw Billy through a brick wall, but the test confirmed their fears. Billy was definitely one of the flayed. Throughout early July 1985, Billy and Heather continued capturing more Hawkins residents and bringing them to Brimborn Steelworks. Each captured person was infected and added to the hive mind. Then the Mind Flayer would melt most of them down into biomass. The creature was building a proxy body for itself out of the flesh and bones of the flayed. This proxy body went through several stages of development. It started as a mass of melted rats, then incorporated human biomass to grow larger. At one point, it appeared in Hawkins Memorial Hospital, where it attacked Nancy and Jonathan, taking the form called the Hospital Monster. The creature continued absorbing more flayed humans and evolved into what was called the Spider Monster. The Spider Monster was enormous, made entirely of flesh, bone, and organic matter, shaped into a form resembling the Mind Flayer's true, spider-like appearance in the Upside Down. The creature had tentacles extending from its body that could grab and pierce people. One of these tentacles bit into Eleven's leg during a fight at Hopper's cabin on July 3rd, leaving behind a piece of the Mind Flayer embedded in her flesh. This piece moved under her skin and caused her immense pain. Jonathan had to cut into her leg to remove it. Unknown to Eleven at the time, this attack served another purpose beyond just hurting her. The Mind Flayer used that moment of contact to siphon some of Eleven's psychic abilities, weakening her powers. On July 4th, 1985, the final confrontation occurred at Starcourt Mall. The Mind Flayer sent its proxy body to kill Eleven and the other members of the party. Billy served as the creature's agent, using his car to prevent anyone from escaping the mall parking lot. The Spider Monster crashed through the mall and attacked the group. Eleven used her powers to fight it, but struggled because her abilities were weakening. The creature's tentacles grabbed Eleven and pulled her toward its mouth. At that moment, Billy stepped between Eleven and the monster. Something in Billy's mind broke free from the Mind Flayer's control. Eleven had earlier used her powers to enter Billy's memories and showed him a vision of his mother at the beach when he was a child. That memory of his last happy moment before his mother left him proved powerful enough to overcome the Mind Flayer's influence. Billy stood his ground as the Mind Flayer's tentacles pierced through his body repeatedly. He held the creature back long enough for Joyce and Hopper to destroy the Soviet key machine beneath the mall. When the key was destroyed, the gate to the Upside Down collapsed and closed. The psychic connection between dimensions was severed again. The moment the gate closed, the Spider Monster lost its connection to the Mind Flayer's consciousness in the Upside Down. The creature stopped moving and collapsed into a pile of lifeless organic matter. All the flesh and bone that had been held together by the Mind Flayer's psychic control simply fell apart. Billy died from his wounds, apologizing to Max before succumbing. The Mind Flayer's physical form in the human world was destroyed, and the fragment that had been trapped since 1984 was apparently eliminated. However, the Mind Flayer itself remained alive in the Upside Down, waiting for another opportunity to invade the human world. In March 1986, Will Byers returned to Hawkins after living in California with the Byers family for 8 months. The moment he arrived in town, Will immediately felt Vecna's presence through his lingering connection to the hive mind. But now Will realized something he had not understood before. When the Mind Flayer possessed him in 1984, it was not really the Mind Flayer in control, it was Vecna. Henry Creel had been the consciousness behind everything the Mind Flayer did. Will explained to Mike that he could still sense Vecna and understand how he thought. Vecna was not going to stop until he had taken everything and everyone. The Mind Flayer was just an extension of Vecna's will, a tool he had created to achieve his goals of destroying humanity and merging the Upside Down with the real world. The revelation that Vecna controlled the Mind Flayer reframed every supernatural event that had occurred in Hawkins since 1983. The Demogorgon taking Will to the Upside Down was Vecna's doing. The possession of Will and the attack on Hawkins' lab in 1984 was Vecna testing his ability to control humans through the hive mind. The creation of the Flayed and the Spider Monster in 1985 was Vecna attempting to build a physical vessel through which he could operate in the human world. Every action attributed to the Mind Flayer was actually Vecna pulling the strings from within the Upside Down. The Mind Flayer was not a separate entity making its own decisions, but rather a manifestation of Vecna's consciousness spread across countless particles. By November 1987, Vecna had succeeded in opening 4 gates that merged at the center of Hawkins. The dimensional barrier was catastrophically damaged, and the Upside Down was bleeding into reality. The hive mind connection was stronger than ever. Hopper and Joyce discovered that killing creatures connected to the hive mind would cause pain to everything else in the network. When they killed captured Demogorgons in Russia, the vines in the Upside Down released their grip on Steve, Nancy, and Robin at the Creel house in Hawkins. This confirmed that all creatures connected to the Mind Flayer shared a psychic link that made them vulnerable when any part of the hive was damaged. The Mind Flayer represented the ultimate expression of Vecna's power to connect and control other beings, making him not just a powerful individual, but the consciousness of an entire hostile dimension directed toward one purpose: the complete conquest and transformation of the human world. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Next up, we have Henry Creel, 001, Vecna, the first test subject. Henry Creel was born in 1947 in Nevada to Victor Creel, a World War II veteran, and Virginia Creel. He had a younger sister named Alice, who was 3 years older than him. From a young age, Henry struggled to fit in with other children. His father, Victor, later described him as a sensitive boy who did not connect well with his peers. Many of Henry's teachers and doctors described him as broken, suggesting he displayed unusual behavior even before his powers fully manifested. Henry felt isolated and misunderstood throughout his childhood, viewing himself as fundamentally different from other people. In the spring of 1959, Virginia's great-uncle passed away and left her a small fortune. The Creel family used this money to purchase a large house in Hawkins, Indiana. Victor and Virginia hoped this move would provide a fresh start for Henry and help him overcome whatever issues he was experiencing. Henry remained pessimistic about the move, believing Hawkins would be no different from anywhere else the family had lived. However, Henry did find some comfort after discovering a nest of black widow spiders living in the bathroom vent of their new house. He became fascinated with these spiders, relating to how misunderstood they were, and viewing them as the most important of all predators because they provided structure for the weak. Shortly after moving to Hawkins, Henry discovered he possessed powerful psychokinetic and telepathic abilities. He could move objects with his mind, enter other people's thoughts, and manipulate their perceptions of reality. Henry began experimenting with his powers by killing small animals that he found around the property. Victor would later recall finding dead animals on their lawn, but never understood what was killing them. As Henry grew more comfortable with his abilities, he began using them to reach into his family members' minds and discover their darkest secrets and memories. He learned about his father's experiences during World War II, including a moment when Victor had been responsible for shelling a building that contained civilians, leaving Victor haunted by the image of a burning baby cradle he found in the destroyed building. Henry came to view his family and humanity in general with contempt. He saw people as weak, deluded parasites who created artificial structures and rules that denied the underlying order of nature. Henry believed he was meant to be a predator, similar to the black widow spiders he admired, and that his purpose was to purge weakness from humanity. He began psychologically tormenting his family with visions, using his powers to make them experience disturbing hallucinations. The house's lights would flicker, clocks would stop, and family members would see terrifying things that were not really there. Victor believed they were being haunted by a demon, never suspecting his own son was responsible for the phenomena. On March 14, 1959, Henry decided to kill his family. During dinner that evening, Henry used his powers to turn on the radio, distracting his father. As the lights began flickering, Henry launched Virginia into the air and used his psychokinetic abilities to break the bones in her limbs and implode her eyes in their sockets. She crashed lifelessly onto the dining room table. Victor, ignorant of his son's bloody nose, which indicated Henry was using his powers, grabbed his children and attempted to escape through the front door. Henry used his abilities to jam the lock while simultaneously making Victor hallucinate about his experiences in the war. While Victor was trapped in this vision, Henry killed Alice in the same brutal manner as their mother. Henry intended to kill Victor as well, but he made a crucial mistake by turning on the radio. The music playing provided Victor with an anchor to reality, acting like the voice of an angel that allowed him to break free from Henry's psychic control. Upon snapping out of the trance, Victor collapsed. Henry had exhausted himself using so much power and fell into a coma before he could complete his plan. When authorities found the scene, they assumed Victor was responsible for murdering his wife and daughter. Victor survived his injuries, including a clock shard to his eye, but he was arrested, tried, and institutionalized for the murders. He would spend the rest of his life in the psychiatric ward at Penhurst Mental Hospital, insisting that a demon had killed his family while no one believed him. Dr. Martin Brenner from Hawkins National Laboratory learned about Henry's case and the unusual circumstances surrounding the Creel family murders. Brenner recognized that Henry possessed genuine psychokinetic abilities and convinced the government to let him take Henry into his custody. Brenner implanted a device called Soteria into Henry's neck, which suppressed his powers and tracked his movements using GPS technology. Brenner also tattooed the number 001 on Henry's left forearm, designating him as the first subject in what would become a long-running experiment. While the Soteria chip kept Henry's abilities suppressed, Brenner took samples of Henry's blood and used them to recreate his powers in other children. This is how Brenner created the test subjects at Hawkins' lab, including 11. For approximately 20 years, Henry remained at Hawkins' lab with his powers suppressed by the Soteria implant. Brenner forced Henry to work as an orderly at the facility, making him wear a uniform and perform menial tasks while hiding the fact that he was actually Subject 001. Henry had very limited freedom to move around the lab, though he explored its secrets and discovered a boiler room that contained tunnels leading to the outside. However, he could not use these tunnels to escape because of the GPS tracking in the Soteria chip. By 1979, Brenner had successfully created at least 18 child test subjects with psychokinetic abilities similar to Henry's. These children, numbered 2 through 18, plus 11 who had been born in 1971, lived at the lab and were raised by Brenner, who made them all call him Papa. The test subjects underwent daily training and tests in a large room called the Rainbow Room, which was painted with rainbow patterns on the walls and floor. Brenner would have the children compete against each other, using their powers to manipulate objects or perform various tasks. Subject 2 was the strongest bully among the children and would frequently torment the weaker subjects, particularly 11, who struggled with the exercises and was viewed by the other children as the weakest. Henry took a particular interest in 11 during his time working as an orderly. He befriended her, offering encouraging words and advice when the other children ridiculed her. Henry believed both of them were similarly misunderstood and saw potential in 11 that no one else recognized. On September 4, 1979, Brenner brought all the test subjects into the main training room for an exercise where they would psychically manipulate a series of light bulbs. The children took turns attempting to illuminate the bulbs, with Subject 2 successfully lighting all of them at once to demonstrate his power. When 11's turn came, she struggled to light even a single bulb. 2 and his friends mocked her failure. Later that day, Henry approached 11 and spoke to her about how people tried to force individuals to be something they were not. He began subtly manipulating 11 over the following days, turning her against Brenner and the other children while presenting himself as her only true ally. On September 8, 1979, Henry convinced 11 to follow him to a storage closet in the basement of the laboratory. He revealed a loose pipe and showed 11 a secret tunnel system. Henry told 11 about a child designated 001, who Brenner had kept hidden from everyone, describing this child as different from the others. Then, Henry rolled up his sleeve to reveal his 001 tattoo, shocking 11 by exposing his true identity. Henry explained that Brenner had used him to create all the other children and asked 11 to use her powers to remove the Soteria implant from his neck. 11, believing she was helping her friend escape, used her abilities to extract the device. The moment the Soteria chip was removed, Henry's full powers returned. He used his restored abilities to maim and kill the guards who tried to stop him. He took 11 back to the storage cupboard and told her to wait there while he dealt with the others. Henry then went on a murderous rampage throughout Hawkins' lab. He brutally killed all the other test subjects from 2 through 18, as well as numerous lab personnel and guards. He used his signature method of making his victims levitate before breaking their bones and destroying their eyes. The massacre was swift and merciless. Dr. Brenner was knocked unconscious during the attack, but survived. 11 emerged from the storage cupboard when alarms began blaring throughout the facility. She found the lab corridors littered with dead bodies and blood everywhere. She made her way to the Rainbow Crew where she discovered Henry finishing the murder of Subject 2. Henry asked 11 why she was upset when the other children and staff had constantly mistreated her. He promised that he understood her and explained his philosophy about humanity being a unique type of pest that needed to be eradicated. Henry told 11 about the Creel family, revealing that he was Victor's son and explaining how he had killed his mother and sister. He described his belief that he was meant to be a predator who would purge weakness from the world. Henry asked 11 to join forces with him in his mission to wipe out humanity and reshape the world according to his vision. 11 refused. She recognized that Henry had been manipulating her all along and wanted nothing to do with his genocidal plans. The two test subjects engaged in a psychokinetic duel. Henry initially overwhelmed Eleven, using his greater experience and power to nearly kill her. He had trained with his abilities for 20 years before the Soteria chip was implanted, giving him far more skill than Eleven possessed. But Eleven tapped into her emotions, first trying to use traumatic memories as Henry had suggested, then switching to her happiest memory of her mother telling her she loved her at birth. This surge of emotion gave Eleven the strength she needed. She used her powers to pin Henry against the wall of the Rainbow Room and began disintegrating his body. Blood streamed from both of Eleven's nostrils as she exerted herself. In the physical world, the lights throughout the facility went haywire from the immense psychic energy being released. As Eleven tore Henry's body apart, an interdimensional gate suddenly appeared in the wall behind him. This was the first gate ever opened to another dimension, created entirely by the force of Eleven's power. Henry's disintegrating body was pulled through the gate before it sealed up and disappeared. Henry fell through a strange space between dimensions that would later be called the Hellscape. For an indeterminate period of time, he tumbled between two parallel planes of existence. He was constantly struck by lightning that leaped across the twin planes, electrocuting him repeatedly. The lightning burned away his flesh and left his body severely damaged and disfigured. This marked the beginning of Henry's physical transformation from human to monster. Eventually, he exited this interdimensional space and landed in a realm that would come to be known as Dimension X. This was a desolate wasteland with floating rocks, scorched skies, and vines growing everywhere. Henry described it as a realm unspoiled by mankind. In Dimension X, Henry discovered various creatures, including demogorgons and flying bat-like beings. He also encountered a massive swirling cloud of dark particles that possessed some form of collective consciousness. Using his psychokinetic abilities, Henry reached out to these particles and began reshaping them. He molded the formless cloud into a giant spider-like creature with multiple tentacles, inspired by the black widow spiders he had loved as a child. This creation became known as the Mind Flayer. By taking control of the particles and shaping them, Henry gained the ability to create a hive mind that connected all creatures in the dimension. He became the ruler of this realm, with every living thing connected to his consciousness. Over the years that followed, Henry's body continued to transform. The damage from the lightning combined with exposure to the toxic environment of Dimension X caused his human form to deteriorate further. His skin became withered and covered in growths. His left hand transformed into a massive claw. Vines and tendrils from the dimension began growing into his flesh, partially merging with his body. By the time Henry returned his attention to the human world in 1983, he had become the monstrous creature that would eventually be nicknamed Vecna by the people of Hawkins. The transformation had taken years, but Henry retained his intelligence, his memories, and his hatred for humanity. When Eleven accidentally opened the Mother Gate at Hawkins' lab on November 6, 1983, it provided Henry with his first opportunity to influence events in the human world. Through the Mind Flayer and the hive mind he controlled, Henry orchestrated the Demogorgon's actions. The creature took Will Byers into the Upside Down, which had somehow transformed from Dimension X into a mirror copy of Hawkins, frozen on November 6, 1983. In October 1984, Henry used the Mind Flayer to possess Will Byers, attempting to use the boy as a spy and a weapon against Hawkins' lab. When Eleven closed the Mother Gate in November 1984, it temporarily cut off Henry's direct influence on the human world, though a fragment of the Mind Flayer remained trapped on Earth. In the summer of 1985, when the Soviets opened a new gate beneath Starcourt Mall, Henry reactivated the trapped fragment of the Mind Flayer. He possessed Billy Hargrove and numerous other Hawkins residents, creating the Flayed and building a massive proxy body out of their melted flesh. This spider monster attacked Eleven and her friends, with Henry using one of its tentacles to bite into Eleven's leg. Unknown to Eleven at the time, this attack allowed Henry to siphon some of her psychic energy, stealing a portion of her powers. When Joyce and Hopper closed the Soviet gate on July 4, 1985, the spider monster was destroyed and Eleven's powers appeared to be gone completely. By stealing some of Eleven's abilities, Henry gained the power to reach across dimensions and enter people's minds even without a gate being open. This is what allowed him to directly attack victims from within the Upside Down in March 1986. Henry developed a specific method for opening gates, which required forming powerful psychic connections with humans and then killing them. each death would cause a new gate to open at the location where the victim died. Henry realized he needed 4 gates total to achieve his ultimate goal of merging the Upside Down with the human world and destroying Hawkins as the first step toward annihilating all of humanity. Henry strategically targeted teenagers in Hawkins who were experiencing trauma or mental health issues. He discovered he could more easily form psychic connections with people who were already suffering, making them vulnerable to his curse. His first victim was Chrissy Cunningham, a popular cheerleader at Hawkins High School who was being verbally abused by her mother and struggling with an eating disorder. Henry made Chrissy experience severe headaches, nosebleeds, and nightmares. On March 14, 1986, Chrissy reported these symptoms to the school guidance counselor, Ms. Kelly. Over the following week, Henry subjected Chrissy to increasingly disturbing hallucinations, including visions of her cruel mother and a grandfather clock infested with black widow spiders. On March 21, 1986, Chrissy went to Eddie Munson's trailer to purchase drugs, hoping they would help with her symptoms. While there, Henry struck. He pulled Chrissy into a psychic trance where she found herself face to face with the monstrous Vecna in a twisted version of her own house. Chrissy levitated in the real world while Eddie watched in horror. Henry used his powers to snap Chrissy's limbs and gouge out her eyes, killing her instantly. A gate began opening in the ceiling of Eddie's trailer. This was the first of the 4 gates Henry needed. Henry's second victim was Fred Benson, a student who worked on the school newspaper with Nancy Wheeler. Fred had been involved in a car accident the previous year that resulted in another student's death, leaving Fred consumed with survivor's guilt. On March 22, 1986, Fred accompanied Nancy to Forest Hills Trailer Park to investigate Chrissy's death. While there, Henry began tormenting Fred with hallucinations. Fred saw visions of his dead friend's grieving family and was forced to relive the car crash. He wandered into the forest, where Henry appeared to him in full, monstrous form. Fred was killed on the road where the original accident had occurred, with his bones broken and eyes destroyed, just like Chrissy. A second gate opened beneath the cement. Henry attempted to kill Max Mayfield on March 24, 1986, but Max escaped when her friends played her favorite song through her Walkman. Music provided an anchor to reality that broke Henry's psychic hold, similar to how the radio had saved Victor Creel from being killed in 1959. On March 25, 1986, Henry shifted his attention to Patrick McKinney, a member of the Hawkins High basketball team who was being physically abused by his father. Patrick was killed while at Lover's Lake with his teammates, levitating above the water before his bones snapped. A third gate opened at the bottom of the lake. On March 27, 1986, Henry made his final move against Max. He had marked her as his 4th victim because she was suffering from depression and guilt after watching her stepbrother Billy Hargrove sacrifice himself in July 1985. Henry pulled Max into his mindscape, where he tortured her with visions of Billy's death and her own guilt. Eleven, who had regained her powers through Dr. Brenner and Dr. Owen's Nina project, used psychic projection to enter Max's mind and fight Henry. At the same time, Nancy Wheeler, Steve Harrington, and Robin Buckley traveled to the upside-down version of the Creel house to attack Henry's physical body with shotguns and Molotov cocktails. The dual assault severely wounded Henry, setting his body on fire and forcing him to release his hold on Nancy, who he had also captured in his mindscape. But Henry succeeded in killing Max. He broke her arms, legs, and jaw, and caused her to lose her vision. Max was clinically dead for over a minute, which was long enough for the 4th gate to begin opening at the Creel house. 11 used her powers to restart Max's heart, bringing her back to life, but Max fell into a coma. The damage had been done. All 4 gates had been triggered. The 4 gates rapidly expanded and spread across Hawkins like massive cracks in reality. They converged at the town square, creating an earthquake-like effect that registered as a 7.4 magnitude quake. 22 people died in the destruction, including Jason Carver. President Reagan declared Hawkins a federal disaster area. By November 1987, over 500 days after the gates opened, the military had established a quarantine around Hawkins, with a base called MAC-Z built around the central portal. The town was fenced off and residents were trapped inside as the Upside Down continued bleeding into reality. Henry Creel, designated as Subject 001 at Hawkins' lab, had transformed from a troubled child into the monstrous Vecna and orchestrated nearly every supernatural event that terrorized Hawkins since 1983. His manipulation of the Mind Flayer, his possession of Will Byers and Billy Hargrove, and his direct murders in 1986 were all part of a decades-long campaign to destroy humanity. Henry viewed himself as a superior predator, culling the weak, when in reality, he was a deeply disturbed individual who had suffered trauma as a child and developed a twisted philosophy that justified mass murder. The revelation of his true identity as the mastermind behind all the horror in Hawkins reframed the entire series, showing that a single human's hatred and desire for power had been the driving force behind the Upside Down's invasion of Earth all along. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Creel House Murders of 1959. After Virginia Creel's great-uncle passed away and left them a small fortune, Victor Creel, who had been born around 1919, was a World War II veteran who married Virginia after the war and started a family with her. They had 2 children, a daughter named Alice and a son named Henry. Victor worked in some form of sales or business, while Virginia was a homemaker who took care of the household. Alice was described as an ordinary, straightforward child who seemed excited about their new life. Henry was 12 years old and had always been more troubled than his sister, struggling to relate to other people and fit in with his peers. The family used Virginia's inheritance to purchase a large, beautiful house in Hawkins. Alice said the house looked like something from a fairy tale when they first saw it. Victor and Virginia were happy with their new home and hopeful that the move would provide a fresh start for the family, particularly for Henry, who had experienced difficulties wherever they had lived before. The house was spacious and well-appointed, with multiple bedrooms and elegant furnishings. For the first month after they moved in, everything seemed peaceful and normal. The Creels settled into their new life in Hawkins, with the children adjusting to their new surroundings, and Victor and Virginia enjoying what appeared to be their dream home. However, after approximately 1 month of tranquility, strange and disturbing events began occurring at the Creel house. The family started finding dead animals around their property. Rabbits, squirrels, chickens, and even dogs were discovered mutilated in their yard and around the neighborhood. The animals had been killed in gruesome ways, torn apart and dismembered. Local authorities and neighbors attributed these deaths to attacks by a wildcat or other predator, but the sheer number of animal deaths was unusual. Victor became increasingly concerned about the safety of his family, especially his children. He would sit on the front porch armed with a gun, keeping watch for whatever was killing the animals. The supernatural phenomena inside the house began shortly after the animal deaths started. The lights in the Creel house would flicker on and off in strange patterns at all hours of the day and night. Clocks throughout the house would stop working or run backward. The family began experiencing terrible nightmares and disturbing visions. Alice would wake up screaming from nightmares, requiring Victor and Virginia to comfort her. The nightmares were so vivid and frightening that they left lasting impressions on the young girl. Victor himself started having encounters with what he believed was a demonic presence in the house. He experienced hallucinations and visions related to his traumatic experiences during World War II. Victor had served in France during the war, and while there, he had made a terrible mistake. He erroneously ordered the shelling of a building that he believed was a military target, only to discover afterward that innocent civilians, including a family with young children, had been inside. Victor found a burning baby cradle in the destroyed building, an image that haunted him for the rest of his life. The guilt from this incident plagued Victor constantly. Now, in the Creel house, the hallucinations he experienced forced him to relive this traumatic memory. He would see visions of the war, the burning building, and the baby cradle. The visions felt completely real and were psychologically torturous. Virginia also experienced disturbing visions, though the specific content of her hallucinations was not fully detailed. The entire family was being subjected to psychological torture through these supernatural phenomena, though none of them understood what was causing it. Victor became convinced that their house was haunted by some kind of demon or malevolent spirit. He tried to rationalize the events through the lens of demonic possession, believing an ancient evil had taken up residence in their home. Victor's paranoia and anxiety grew as the situation worsened. He felt responsible for protecting his family, but had no idea how to fight against an invisible, supernatural force. Victor became desperate to save his family from whatever was tormenting them. According to some accounts, he hired an exorcist or sought help from religious authorities to rid the house of the evil presence. The exorcism apparently failed to improve the situation and may have even made things worse. The entity that Victor believed was haunting them seemed to grow angrier and more aggressive. The psychological torment intensified, with the visions becoming more frequent and more disturbing. The family was being systematically broken down mentally and emotionally by the relentless supernatural assault on their minds. On the evening of March 14, 1959, the Creel family sat down for dinner together. Victor, Virginia, Alice, and Henry were all present at the dining room table. What happened next would destroy the family forever. During the meal, the radio in the house suddenly turned on by itself, playing music that distracted Victor. Then, the lights began flickering violently throughout the house. Victor looked around in confusion and fear, trying to understand what was happening. Suddenly, Virginia was lifted off her chair and raised into the air, levitating several feet above the dining room table. Virginia's body began twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. Her limbs bent at impossible angles as her bones snapped and broke. Her eyes imploded in their sockets, collapsing inward. The gruesome transformation happened rapidly, while Victor and the children watched in absolute horror. Virginia's lifeless body then crashed down onto the dining room table with tremendous force. Blood streamed from her ruined eye sockets, and her limbs lay twisted at grotesque angles. Victor had just witnessed his wife brutally murdered right in front of him, though he had no idea how it was happening or who was responsible. Victor's first instinct was to get his children to safety, ignorant of the bloody nose that Henry had developed, which was the telltale sign that someone was using psychokinetic powers. Victor grabbed both Henry and Alice and tried to flee the house through the front door, but the door would not open. The lock had jammed or been manipulated by some unseen force, trapping them inside. As Victor struggled with the door, he suddenly found himself pulled into another vision. The hallucination transported him back to his experiences in World War II, forcing him to relive the moment when he ordered the shelling of the civilian building. He saw the burning baby cradle again and felt the overwhelming guilt wash over him. While Victor was trapped in this psychic vision, unable to see or interact with the real world around him, Alice was killed in the same brutal manner as her mother. Alice's body was lifted into the air, her bones were snapped and broken, and her eyes were destroyed. She died quickly but horrifically, crashing to the floor as a twisted corpse. Henry attempted to kill Victor as well, using the same method, but something unexpected happened. The music playing on the radio that Henry had turned on earlier provided Victor with an anchor to reality. Victor heard what he would later describe as the voice of an angel singing to him through the radio. This music allowed Victor to break free from the psychic grip that Henry had on his mind. Victor snapped out of the hallucination and found himself back in the real world. He immediately collapsed from the trauma of what he had just experienced and witnessed. Henry, who was only 12 years old, had exhausted himself from using so much psychic energy to kill 2 people and attempt to kill a third. The strain was too much for his young body and developing powers. Henry fell into a coma before he could complete his plan to murder his entire family. When authorities arrived at the scene, they found Victor unconscious on the floor near the bodies of his wife and daughter. Henry was also unconscious and appeared to be in a coma. Victor was the only family member found alive and conscious when he eventually woke up. The crime scene was unlike anything local law enforcement had ever encountered. Virginia and Alice Creel had died in ways that seemed impossible through any normal means. Their bones had been broken and their eyes destroyed, but there was no evidence of physical attack from another person. No murder weapon was found. There were no signs of forced entry from an outside attacker. The brutality and bizarre nature of the murders shocked the small town of Hawkins. Because Victor was the only conscious survivor, and because authorities could not explain the deaths through any rational means, Victor became the primary suspect in the murders. Victor was arrested and charged with killing his wife and daughter. He was also accused of harming his son Henry, who remained in a coma. Victor insisted he was innocent and tried to explain that a demon had been responsible for the deaths. He told investigators about the supernatural events that had been plaguing his family for weeks: the animal deaths, the flickering lights, the nightmares and visions. Victor described how he had watched his wife levitate into the air and be killed by an invisible force. He explained that he had been trapped in a vision when his daughter was murdered and could do nothing to save her. But his claims of demonic possession and supernatural phenomena were not taken seriously by law enforcement or the courts. The case went to trial, and Victor Creel's defense strategy centered on his claims that he was not responsible for the murders. However, his insistence that a demon had killed his family only served to make him appear delusional and mentally unstable. The prosecution argued that Victor had brutally murdered his wife and daughter in a fit of madness, possibly triggered by his unresolved trauma from World War II. They suggested that his guilt over the civilian deaths he had caused in France had driven him to violence. The physical evidence at the scene could not definitively prove how Virginia and Alice had died, but Victor was the only person who could have been responsible, according to the investigation. Victor was declared legally insane and found guilty of the murders. Rather than being sent to a regular prison, he was sentenced to be incarcerated at Pennhurst Mental Hospital in Curry County, Indiana. Pennhurst was a psychiatric facility that housed patients with various mental illnesses and those deemed criminally insane. Victor would spend the next several decades locked away at Pennhurst, far from the outside world. The case became infamous throughout the region. Newspapers covered the gruesome murders extensively, with publications like the Weekly Watcher running sensational stories about Victor Creel and the alleged demon that had killed his family. The Creel House murders became Hawkins' original haunting, a dark piece of local history that people whispered about for years afterward. Meanwhile, Henry Creel's fate remained unknown to Victor and the public. According to Victor's understanding, his son had died from his injuries approximately 1 week after the murders. This is what Victor was told, and what he believed for the rest of his life. In reality, Henry had survived and been taken by Dr. Martin Brenner to Hawkins National Laboratory. The government faked Henry's death and kept his survival secret. Brenner implanted the Soteria device in Henry's neck to suppress his powers and began using him as the blueprint for creating other psychokinetic test subjects. Victor never learned the truth about what happened to his son, or that Henry had been the one who actually killed Virginia and Alice. Life at Pennhurst Mental Hospital was bleak for Victor Creel. He was confined to the criminal ward, locked in a cell, and treated as a dangerous patient. Anthony Hatch served as the warden of Pennhurst and was responsible for overseeing Victor's incarceration. Victor was consumed with guilt and grief over the deaths of his wife and daughter. He was haunted by the memories of what he had witnessed and tormented by the knowledge that he had been unable to protect his family. The psychological burden became too much for Victor to bear. At some point during his early years at Pennhurst, Victor attempted to commit suicide by gouging out his own eyes. Victor took a razor, or sharp object, and began cutting and destroying his own eyes in a desperate attempt to end his life, or perhaps to stop seeing the horrific visions that plagued him. Warden Anthony Hatch discovered Victor during this suicide attempt and stopped him before he could complete the act. Victor survived but was left with severe, permanent damage to his eyes. The injuries left visible scarring and disfigurement. From that point forward, Victor's eyes served as a constant reminder of his trauma and his failed attempt to escape the nightmare his life had become. Despite surviving the suicide attempt, Victor remained at Pennhurst, spending 3 full decades locked away in the psychiatric hospital from 1959 through at least 1986. Over the years, Victor became increasingly reluctant to speak about what had happened to him and his family. He believed that people would think he was insane if he repeated his story about the demon. He also found discussing his tragic past too painful to bear. Reporters and others occasionally sought him out for interviews, hoping to learn more about the infamous Creel House murders, but Victor typically refused to engage. The case remained a source of fascination for people interested in the supernatural and in true crime. The Creel House itself stood empty and abandoned after the murders, with no one willing to live in the place where such horrible events had occurred. It became known as a haunted house in Hawkins, with local residents avoiding the property and telling stories about the evil that resided there. In March 1986, 27 years after the original murders, a series of new killings began occurring in Hawkins, with similarities to the Creel House deaths. Chrissy Cunningham, Fred Benson, and later Patrick McKinney were all killed with their bones broken and eyes destroyed in the same manner as Virginia and Alice Creel. Nancy Wheeler and Robin Buckley, 2 Hawkins High School students, began investigating the connection between the new murders and the old Creel case. They discovered newspaper articles about Victor Creel's trial and learned that he was still alive and imprisoned at Pennhurst Mental Hospital. Nancy and Robin decided to visit Victor at Pennhurst to interview him about what had happened in 1959, hoping to find information that might help them understand the new murders and the creature they had nicknamed Vecna. The 2 young women pretended to be psychology students from the University of Notre Dame, claiming they wanted to interview Victor for their thesis on paranoid schizophrenics. Warden Anthony Hatch initially denied them access, but Robin was able to manipulate him by suggesting that he would have granted access to male students and appealing to his ego. Hatch relented and allowed them to speak with Victor. Before meeting Victor, Hatch gave Nancy and Robin a tour of Pennhurst. He showed them a room where patients sat listening to music, explaining that music could influence parts of the brain that words alone could not reach. This detail would prove crucial later. Hatch made it clear that he believed patients like Victor were beyond repair and would never be rehabilitated. Nancy and Robin were then brought to Victor's cell, where they were left alone to conduct their interview. Victor slowly turned around to face his visitors, revealing his scarred eyes and the permanent damage from his suicide attempt decades earlier. Victor told Nancy and Robin his story, explaining how his family had moved to Hawkins in 1959 and experienced a month of peace before the supernatural events began. He described the dead animals, the flickering lights, and the terrible visions that had tormented his family. Victor recounted in vivid detail the night his wife and daughter were murdered, explaining how Virginia had levitated into the air and been killed by an invisible force. He told them about being trapped in a vision of his wartime trauma while his daughter was murdered. Victor insisted that a demon had been responsible for the deaths and that he was innocent of the crimes. The key revelation in Victor's account was his mention of hearing music during the attack. He described how the voice of an angel had called to him through the radio, pulling him back from the vision and saving his life. This music had provided him with an anchor to reality that allowed him to break free from the demon's psychic grip. Nancy and Robin realized this detail was critically important. If music could break the psychic connection that the killer formed with victims, it might be the key to saving people from Vecna's curse. Their friend Max Mayfield was currently being targeted by Vecna and experiencing the same symptoms that Victor's family had experienced. The interview was cut short when Warden Hatch returned with guards to apprehend Nancy and Robin. Hatch had checked their backgrounds and discovered they were imposters who had lied about being university students. He attempted to have them arrested, but Nancy and Robin fled from Pennhurst and escaped in Nancy's station wagon. Despite the abrupt end to the interview, they had learned what they needed. Nancy and Robin immediately radioed their friends to tell them that music was the key to resisting Vecna. When Max was pulled into Vecna's psychic grip shortly afterward, her friends played her favorite song, Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, through her Walkman. The music provided Max with an anchor to reality, just as it had for Victor Creel in 1959, allowing her to escape from Vecna's mindscape and survive. Victor Creel remained at Pennhurst Mental Hospital with no knowledge that his information had helped save a life. He never learned the full truth about what had happened to his family, or that his son Henry had been the one responsible for the murders. Victor spent the rest of his days locked away in the psychiatric facility, living with the burden of crimes he did not commit and mourning the family he lost. The Creel House murders of 1959 had been Hawkins' first encounter with the supernatural evil that would eventually consume the entire town. Victor's case represented a tragedy on multiple levels. An innocent man punished for murders he did not commit, a family destroyed by one member's unchecked evil, and a father who never learned the truth about his son's role in the horror that had befallen them all. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the party, 4 friends pulled into a war. Mike Wheeler was born on April 7, 1969, to Ted and Karen Wheeler, making him the second child and only son in the family. His older sister Nancy was born in 1967. The family lived in a cul-de-sac in Hawkins, Indiana, a small town where everyone knew each other and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. Around 1979, during their early elementary school years, Mike felt lonely and unsure one day at school. He noticed another boy sitting alone on the swing set and walked up to him. This boy was Will Byers, who had been born on March 22, 1972, making him about 3 years younger than Mike. Mike asked Will if he wanted to be friends, and Will happily agreed. This simple moment on the playground marked the beginning of a friendship that would define both of their lives. Lucas Sinclair was born around 1969 or 1970 to Charles and Sue Sinclair and became the firstborn child in his family. His younger sister Erica was born in 1975. Lucas lived near Mike Wheeler in the same neighborhood, and because of their proximity, Lucas joined the friend group with Mike and Will. The 3 boys formed a tight bond and spent much of their time together. On September 1, 1980, Mike and Lucas were being chased by school bullies and ended up hiding in a bookshop. There, the shop owner was displaying miniatures from the Battle of Waterloo and a new game called Dungeons & Dragons. Mike and Lucas became immediately excited about this game and rushed to tell Will about it when they got to his house. The boys quickly became obsessed with Dungeons & Dragons, spending countless hours playing campaigns together. Dustin Henderson was born around 1970 or 1971, though unlike the other boys, the identity of his father was not established, and he was raised by his single mother, Claudia Henderson. Around 1980, when the boys were in 4th grade, Dustin moved to Hawkins and joined the neighborhood. Mike, Will, and Lucas befriended this new student who shared their interest in science, games, and adventure. Dustin had a condition called cleidocranial dysplasia, which affected the development of his teeth and bones. But the other boys never treated him differently because of it. Dustin was curious, intelligent, and enthusiastic, fitting perfectly into the group dynamic. With Dustin's arrival, the core friend group was complete. The 4 boys called themselves the Party, using terminology from their beloved Dungeons & Dragons campaigns. The party spent most of their free time together, playing Dungeons & Dragons in Mike Wheeler's basement. Mike typically served as the dungeon master, creating elaborate campaigns for the group to play through. The boys would gather after school and on weekends, rolling dice and immersing themselves in fantasy adventures. The game allowed them to escape into a world where they could be heroes, battling monsters and going on quests. In their real lives, the 4 boys were considered nerds and social outcasts at school. They were not athletic or popular. They preferred science and fantasy games over sports and typical adolescent interests. When the boys started middle school at Hawkins Middle School, they became targets for bullies Troy Walsh and James Dante. These older, more physically intimidating students would push them around, call them names, and make their school lives miserable. Despite the bullying, the party stuck together and found refuge in their friendship with each other. They also formed a strong relationship with their science teacher, Scott Clark, who ran the school's AV club. Mr. Clark appreciated the boys' curiosity and intelligence, treating them with respect and encouraging their scientific interests. The boys joined the AV club and participated in activities that aligned with their interests. On the evening of November 6, 1983, the 4 boys gathered in Mike Wheeler's basement for another Dungeons & Dragons campaign. This would be the last normal night of their childhood. Mike, acting as Dungeon Master, had created a particularly challenging adventure for the party. At a crucial moment in the game, Mike summoned a Demogorgon, one of the most powerful and terrifying monsters in Dungeons & Dragons lore. The Demogorgon attacked Will's wizard character. The boys frantically searched for the 14-sided die needed to determine whether Will's character would survive the attack. They could not find it. Without the die roll, the campaign ended on a cliffhanger, with Will's character defeated by the Demogorgon. Mike's mother Karen insisted it was time for Will, Lucas, and Dustin to go home since it had gotten late. The boys reluctantly ended their game session. Will, Lucas, and Dustin retrieved their bicycles from the Wheeler garage and rode off together into the night. The 3 boys pedaled through the quiet streets of Hawkins under the glow of street lamps. At a fork in the road, the boys said goodbye to each other. Lucas and Dustin turned one direction toward their homes, while Will continued alone toward his house. Will pedaled down the empty road with only the sound of his bicycle chain and the wind in his ears. Suddenly, his bicycle headlight began flickering. Will looked up and saw something standing in the road ahead of him. The shape blocking Will's path was a creature unlike anything that existed in the normal world. It stood on 2 legs like a human, but was clearly not human. Will's eyes widened in terror as he realized he was looking at something impossible, something from a nightmare. He immediately turned his bicycle around and pedaled as fast as he could back the way he had come, racing toward home. The creature pursued him through the darkness. Will's heart pounded as he rode his bike with every ounce of strength he had, desperately trying to escape whatever was chasing him. He made it to his house and threw his bike down in the yard, running toward the door. The lock was jammed, or he fumbled with his keys in his panic. Will could not get inside. Instead of continuing to struggle with the front door, Will ran to the shed in the backyard. He burst inside and slammed the door shut behind him, breathing heavily. The shed was dark and filled with tools and equipment. Will reached for the rifle his father kept stored there, loading it with shaking hands. He pointed the gun at the door, waiting for whatever had been chasing him to appear. The lights in the shed began flickering. Will looked around in confusion and fear. Suddenly, the creature was inside the shed with him, though Will had not seen it enter. The thing had no visible eyes, but its head opened like a grotesque flower to reveal rows of teeth. Will did not have time to fire the gun. The Demogorgon took him. The next morning, November 7th, 1983, Joyce Byers woke up to find that her son Will had not come home. His bicycle was lying abandoned in the yard, and there was no sign of him anywhere. Joyce immediately knew something was terribly wrong. She called Will's friends to see if he had stayed with any of them, but Mike, Lucas, and Dustin confirmed they had all separated and gone to their own homes the night before. Joyce called the police, and Chief Jim Hopper began investigating Will's disappearance. The entire town mobilized to search for the missing boy. Volunteers combed through the woods around Hawkins, calling Will's name and looking for any sign of him. Mike, Lucas, and Dustin were devastated by their friend's disappearance. They could not accept that Will might be dead or gone forever. The 3 boys decided to conduct their own search for Will, using their knowledge of the area and their determination to find their friend. On the night of November 7th, the boys grabbed flashlights and rode their bicycles into the woods where Will had vanished. They searched along Mirkwood, a stretch of wooded road they had named after the forest in The Hobbit. The boys called out for Will as they moved through the dark woods, hoping to find some clue about what had happened to him. As they searched, it began to rain. Dustin tried to convince Mike and Lucas that they should turn back because of the storm and because they were heading toward the spot where Will disappeared without any weapons to protect themselves. Suddenly, the boys heard a rustling sound nearby. They turned their flashlights toward the noise and froze. A figure emerged from the shadows, but it was not Will. Instead, they found a girl, approximately their age, wearing a large hospital gown and looking terrified and confused. The girl had very short hair, almost completely shaved, and seemed to be alone in the woods with no shoes and no supplies. Mike approached her carefully and asked if she was okay and where her parents were. The girl did not respond with clear answers. She seemed traumatized and unable or unwilling to speak much. Mike noticed she was shivering from the cold and rain. He made a quick decision. Rather than reporting the girl to the police immediately, Mike brought her to his house. The boys smuggled the strange girl into Mike's basement without alerting his parents. Mike gave her dry clothes to change into and made a pillow fort for her to sleep in. The boys tried to learn more about the girl, asking her basic questions about who she was and where she came from. She showed them a tattoo on her left forearm that read 011. The boys quickly understood this was some kind of identification number rather than a name. Mike decided to call her 11, or L for short. 11 seemed frightened of the outside world and begged the boys not to tell anyone about her, suggesting that bad people were looking for her. Mike agreed to keep her presence a secret, at least temporarily, believing this girl might somehow be connected to Will's disappearance. The next day, November 8th, Mike stayed home from school to accommodate 11 and make sure she remained hidden. After school, Lucas and Dustin came to Mike's house to discuss 11 and what they should do about her. Lucas argued strongly that they should tell Mike's mother Karen about 11. This mysterious girl was clearly in trouble, and Lucas believed the responsible thing to do was to let adults handle the situation. Mike disagreed, insisting they needed to keep 11 hidden because she seemed to know something about Will. When Lucas moved toward the door to go tell Karen about 11, the door suddenly slammed shut by itself. 11 had used her telekinetic powers to stop Lucas from leaving, demonstrating to all three boys that she possessed abilities beyond normal human capability. That evening, the boys tried to get 11 to explain what had happened to Will. She walked over to their Dungeons & Dragons board and flipped it upside down. On top of the overturned board, 11 placed Will's game piece, the wizard figure. Then, she placed the Demogorgon figure on the board as well. The boys stared at the demonstration in shock. 11 was showing them that Will was in some kind of upside-down version of their world, and that the monster from their game was somehow real and connected to Will's disappearance. This gave Mike, Lucas, and Dustin their first real clue about what had happened to their friend. If Will was trapped in another dimension with a monster, they needed to find a way to reach him and bring him back. The boys decided to launch what they called Operation Mirkwood. 11 led them through the woods, using her apparent knowledge of where Will might be. The group eventually arrived outside the Byers household. 11 indicated that Will was hiding somewhere related to this location. The boys realized Will must have come home and hidden somewhere when he was being chased. They began searching the property, eventually finding Castle Byers, a small fort Will had built in the woods behind his house. Inside Castle Byers, they found evidence that Will had been there recently. This discovery proved Will had made it close to home before disappearing, but it did not explain where he had gone or how to find him. Joyce Byers, working independently from the boys' investigation, experienced her own strange phenomena related to Will's disappearance. The lights in her house began flickering and behaving in unusual patterns. Joyce became convinced that Will was somehow communicating with her through the lights, turning them on and off to answer yes or no questions. She also received a phone call where she heard breathing and what sounded like Will trying to speak, followed by animalistic growling. The phone sparked and shocked her hand. Joyce realized that Will was alive and trapped somewhere, possibly in another dimension, and that he was trying desperately to reach her. She strung Christmas lights all over the walls of her house, creating a system where Will could spell out messages by making specific lights glow. Mike contacted his science teacher, Mr. Clark, to learn more about alternate dimensions. Mr. Clark explained theoretical physics concepts, telling the boys that different dimensions could exist parallel to their own world. He described how a gate between dimensions would require tearing through the fabric of space and time, and such a gate would have a strong electromagnetic field. The boys realized they could use compasses to locate a gate, as the electromagnetic field would interfere with the compass needles and make them point toward the gate instead of magnetic north. Mike, Lucas, Dustin, and Eleven set out with compasses to find the gate to this alternate dimension where they believed Will was trapped. As the boys followed their compasses through the woods, they noticed that Eleven seemed uncomfortable with the direction they were heading. She kept trying to redirect them or suggest alternative paths. Lucas became increasingly suspicious of Eleven's behavior. He believed she was manipulating their compasses with her powers and leading them away from wherever the gate actually was. Lucas confronted Eleven, accusing her of lying to them and using Mike's hospitality while providing no real help in finding Will. The argument escalated until Lucas physically attacked Mike for defending Eleven. Eleven used her powers to knock Lucas unconscious, sending him flying through the air. Mike and Dustin expressed shock at what Eleven had done. Overcome with guilt and fear about hurting Lucas, Eleven ran away from the group and disappeared into the woods. Mike and Dustin searched desperately for Eleven, calling her name and trying to find where she had gone. While they were looking for her, school bullies Troy and James found them and decided to exact revenge for a previous incident where Eleven had used her powers to humiliate Troy. Troy grabbed Dustin and held a knife near his face, threatening to cut out Dustin's teeth if Mike did not jump off a nearby cliff into the quarry below. Mike looked at Dustin, then at the long drop to the water far below. To save his friend, Mike jumped. Dustin screamed in horror, certain Mike was about to die, but Mike did not fall. An invisible force, which was revealed to be Eleven using her telekinetic abilities, caught Mike in midair and pulled him safely back to the top of the cliff. Eleven had returned at the crucial moment to save Mike's life. The party reunited at an abandoned junkyard where they hid from the government agents who were searching for Eleven. Lucas apologized to Eleven for attacking Mike and doubting her. The boys made amends with each other, understanding that they needed to work together to save Will. While they were hiding, Mike's older sister Nancy and Police Chief Hopper contacted the kids by radio. Hopper came to the junkyard to pick them up and brought them to the Byers house. There, the boys explained everything they had discovered to Joyce, Hopper, Nancy, and Jonathan Byers. Eleven attempted to locate Will using her powers while at the Byers house, but she was unable to sense him, which worried everyone. The group decided they needed to create a sensory deprivation tank, similar to the one Eleven had used at Hawkins' lab, to amplify her abilities. They traveled to Hawkins Middle School, where they could use the swimming pool and a large quantity of salt from the school's storage. Working together, they constructed a makeshift sensory deprivation tank by lining the pool with plastic and filling it with water mixed with bags of de-icing salt. 11. Wearing swimming goggles to serve as a blindfold, floated in the dark, salty water. She entered a deep psychic state and searched for Will across dimensions. In the void of her mind, 11 finally located Will. He was in the upside-down version of Castle Byers, cold and weak, but still alive. Will was being used as a host by the Demogorgon, with a tentacle down his throat. 11 reported Will's status to the group. Hopper and Joyce left immediately to rescue Will, entering the Upside Down through the gate at Hawkins' lab, while the kids stayed at the middle school. As 11 rested from her psychic exertion, government agents from Hawkins' lab, led by Dr. Brenner and a ruthless operative named Connie Fraser, stormed into the middle school. The agents surrounded the kids, pointing guns at them and demanding they surrender 11. Agent Fraser pulled out her pistol and aimed it at Mike's head, threatening to kill him if 11 did not come with them peacefully. Mike looked at 11 and told her that the agents could not hurt her anymore because she was part of their party now. 11 stood up, blood beginning to drip from her nose as she activated her powers. She disarmed all the agents with a wave of her hand, snapping their bones and sending them flying through the air. When Fraser tried to shoot Mike, 11 stopped the bullet in midair and then used her powers to throw Fraser into a wall, knocking her unconscious. Dr. Brenner and his remaining agents fled the school, but they set up a roadblock on the route the kids needed to take. Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and 11 rode their bicycles as fast as they could toward the Wheeler house, with government vans pursuing them. The agents closed in, and a van came airborne toward the kids. Just as it seemed they would be hit, 11 used her most powerful demonstration of telekinesis yet. She lifted the van in midair and flipped it over the heads of the kids, causing it to crash behind them and block the pursuing agents. The effort exhausted 11 severely, but the kids successfully escaped. They hid at Mike's house, waiting for news about Will's rescue. Meanwhile, Hopper and Joyce navigated through the Upside Down and found Will at the public library, just as 11 had described. Will was barely alive, suspended against the wall with a tentacle from the Demogorgon down his throat. Hopper cut Will free and pulled the tentacle out. Will was not breathing. Hopper performed CPR while Joyce begged her son to wake up. Finally, Will gasped and opened his eyes. Hopper and Joyce carried Will back through the gate to the real world and rushed him to the hospital. At Hawkins Middle School, the Demogorgon broke through from the Upside Down and attacked the kids. Mike, Dustin, and Lucas ran for their lives as the monster stalked them through the school hallways. They became trapped with nowhere left to run. 11 stepped between the boys and the Demogorgon, facing down the creature that had taken Will. She told Mike and the others to go, but they refused to leave her. Mike grabbed 11's hand and told her that he would not let the bad men take her anymore, saying they would protect her together, because that was what friends did. 11 realized she had to destroy the Demogorgon, even if it meant sacrificing herself. She turned to Mike and said goodbye, kissing him gently on the cheek. Then 11 unleashed the full force of her psychic powers against the Demogorgon. The creature and 11 both disintegrated into particles and vanished, leaving only Mike, Dustin, and Lucas standing alone in the middle school hallway. The boys were devastated. They had saved Will, but they had lost 11 in the process. Mike was particularly heartbroken, having developed deep feelings for the girl who had become part of their party in such a short time. Will Byers spent time recovering in the hospital before being released to go home with his family. The party reunited, with Mike, Lucas, Dustin, and Will together again. The four boys tried to return to normal life, going back to school and resuming their Dungeons & Dragons campaigns. But nothing would ever truly be normal again. Mike spent months trying to contact 11 over walkie-talkie radio, calling out to her every night without receiving any response. He refused to believe she was gone permanently, holding on to hope that somehow she had survived. The other boys saw Mike's pain but did not know how to help him process the loss. On December 15, 1984, Hawkins Middle School held its annual Snowball Dance. The party attended together, marking a moment where they were all finally reunited and safe after the chaos of the previous year. However, their peace would not last. By October 1984, Will began experiencing visions of the Upside Down and seeing a massive shadow creature looming in the sky of that dimension. The Mind Flayer possessed Will, using him as a spy. The party found themselves pulled into another supernatural crisis, this time fighting to save Will from possession. Mike, Lucas, and Dustin worked alongside 11, who had survived and been living in hiding with Hopper, plus new friend Max Mayfield, to drive the Mind Flayer out of Will's body and close the gate again. In the summer of 1985, the party dealt with new complications as they entered adolescence. Mike and 11 were dating. Lucas and Max were in an on-again, off-again relationship. Dustin had met a girlfriend named Susie at summer camp, and Will felt increasingly left behind as his friends grew interested in romance rather than their childhood games. The Mind Flayer returned through a Soviet open gate, possessing Billy Hargrove and creating an army of flayed. The party worked together again to stop the invasion, though they suffered losses, including Billy's death and Hopper's apparent sacrifice. 11 lost her powers in the battle, and the Byers family, now including 11, moved away from Hawkins to California in the fall of 1985. By the spring of 1986, the party was divided geographically, with Will, 11, and the Byers family living in Lenora Hills, California, while Mike, Lucas, and Dustin remained in Hawkins. Mike, Lucas, and Dustin joined the Hellfire Club, Hawkins High School's Dungeons & Dragons club run by Eddie Munson. When Vecna began killing teenagers in Hawkins, the party mobilized once again. Dustin took the lead in investigating the murders and dubbed the creature Vecna after the Dungeons & Dragons villain. Max, who had become a full member of the party and was dealing with depression and guilt after Billy's death, became Vecna's target. The separated members of the party worked across the country to understand the threat, with 11 regaining her powers and fighting Vecna psychically while the Hawkins group attacked him physically. Despite their efforts, they could not stop Vecna from opening 4 gates that converged on Hawkins, beginning the end of the world. By November 1987, the party faced the consequences of Vecna's actions. Hawkins was under military quarantine, with gates spreading across the town and the Upside Down bleeding into reality. The party, which had started as 4 middle school boys playing Dungeons & Dragons in a basement, had spent 4 years fighting creatures from another dimension. They had saved the world multiple times, lost people they loved, and been forced to grow up far too quickly. Mike Wheeler, the leader who had invited a strange girl into his basement and changed everything. Will Byers, who survived being trapped in the Upside Down and later possessed by the Mind Flayer, maintaining a connection to that realm that he could not escape. Lucas Sinclair, initially the skeptic who learned to trust and became a loyal protector of his friends. Dustin Henderson, the curious scientist who named the monsters and figured out the mysteries others missed. Together with Eleven and Max, they formed the core group fighting against the supernatural forces threatening their world. Ordinary kids thrust into an extraordinary and terrifying war that seemed to have no end in sight. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.